Fact 1. In many Victorian households, the day began well before dawn for the lowest servants. A young kitchen maid, often only 12 or 13 years old, would rise quietly around 5 in the morning. She carried a small lantern or candle to the cold scullery, where she filled heavy iron kettles with water from the pump outside, or the indoor cistern if the house had one. She then built up the kitchen range fire slowly, adding small pieces of kindling first, then larger coal lumps, waiting patiently as the flames caught and steadied. Once the water began to warm, she scrubbed the wooden preparation tables with a stiff brush and soft soap, rinsing carefully so no residue remained to taint the day's food. This scrubbing happened every single morning, the same steady motion across the same worn boards until the surface felt smooth under her fingers again. Later, she checked the copper pots hanging on the wall, wiping away any overnight condensation with a dry cloth before the cook arrived. The whole process moved without hurry, each step deliberate and repeated day after day in the dim pre-dawn light.
Fact 2. Housemaids in middle-class homes spent a great deal of time tending to grates and fireplaces. Early each morning, after the family still slept, the maid knelt on the hearthrug and removed yesterday's ash with a small shovel, tipping it carefully into a bucket so as not to scatter dust. She then swept the grate clean with a soft brush, wiping the iron bars with a damp rag dipped in vinegar water to prevent rust. Blacklid polish came next, a thick paste applied with a cloth or brush in slow circular motions until the metal gleamed dully. She waited several minutes for it to set before buffing it with another dry cloth, checking from different angles to ensure no streaks remained. This task repeated in every room with a fireplace, often 10 or more in larger houses, the same quiet rhythm of applying, waiting, and polishing, filling hour after hour.
Fact 3. Laundry day, usually Monday, followed a fixed and lengthy routine in most homes. The night before, soiled linens and clothes, soaked in large wooden tubs filled with cold water and a handful of washing soda crystals to loosen dirt. In the morning, the maid carried these heavy, sodden bundles to the wash house or back kitchen. She rubbed each item against a corrugated washboard with yellow soap cut into bars, working section by section with steady pressure from her knuckles. After scrubbing, garments went into a large copper boiler over the fire, where they simmered gently for an hour or more, while she stirred occasionally with a long wooden dolly stick. Rinsing followed in multiple changes of water carried in buckets from the pump, each rinse checked by feel until the water ran clear. Wringing by hand or through a mangle took strength and patience. Then items hung on lines or over horses to dry slowly in the air.
Fact 4. Polishing silver occupied many quiet afternoons for butlers or parlor maids in wealthier houses. The servant sat at a table covered with an old cloth, laying out each piece, spoons, forks, teapots, candlesticks, on green baize to prevent scratches. A mixture of whiting powder and ammonia, or a commercial plate powder, was dampened and applied with a soft rag in small sections. After a short wait for the tarnish to lift, the piece was rubbed firmly but gently until it shone. Each item received a final buff with a clean chamois leather, held up to the light to inspect for any remaining dull spots. The silver was then wrapped in tissue or baize bags and returned to the plate chest, only to repeat the process a week or two later as exposure to air slowly dulled it again.
Fact 5. In the Victorian era, chamber pots required daily attention from housemaids. Each morning, after the family rose, the maid carried a covered slop pail from room to room. She emptied each pot carefully into the pail, rinsed it with a little water from a jug, and wiped the inside with a cloth kept for that purpose. The pots themselves were porcelain or earthenware, stored under beds or in nightstands during the day. She checked for cracks or chips that might cause leaks, replacing any damaged ones from the storeroom supply. The slop pail, now full, went downstairs to be emptied into the outdoor privy or cesspit, a task repeated without fail every single morning in every occupied bedroom.
Fact 6. Dust accumulated quickly in Victorian rooms due to coal fires and open windows. Parlor maids dusted daily with soft feather brushes or lint-free cloths, moving methodically from high shelves to low tables. They lifted each ornament, a porcelain figurine, a small vase, a framed photograph, wiped beneath it, then replaced it exactly as before, checking the position against faint marks on the surface. Heavy furniture was pulled slightly away from walls once a week for behind dusting, the maid crawling underneath to reach corners where fluff gathered. This careful, repetitive lifting and replacing continued room by room, ensuring surfaces.
Fact 7. Window cleaning formed part of the weekly routine in most homes. The maid carried a bucket of warm water mixed with a little vinegar or ammonia upstairs, along with soft rags and a chamois leather. She wiped each pane first with the damp cloth to remove soot, then dried and polished with the leather in overlapping strokes until no streaks showed when viewed from an angle. Frames and sills received attention too, scrubbed gently to remove dirt trapped in corners. In tall houses, upper windows might require a long-handled brush or ladder, but the motion stayed slow and even, pane after pane, floor after floor.
Fact 8. Stair carpets needed regular beating to remove embedded dust. Once a week, the housemaid rolled up sections of carpet, carried them outside to the yard or area steps, draped them over a line, and beat them steadily with a rattan beater. Each side received several minutes of firm, rhythmic strikes, dust clouds rising gently into the air. After beating, she brushed the pile with a stiff broom to lift the nap, then relaid the carpet, tucking edges neatly under brass rods and checking that no wrinkles formed. The same stairs received this treatment week after week, the beating sound a familiar, distant thud through the house.
Fact 9. In kitchens, copper pans required constant upkeep to prevent verdigris. The scullery maid polished them weekly with a paste of salt, flour, and vinegar or lemon juice. She rubbed each pan inside and out with the mixture using a soft cloth. Let it sit briefly, then rinsed thoroughly and dried immediately to avoid spotting. The exterior shone bright orange-red after buffing. The tin-lined interior stayed dull but clean. Pans hung on hooks or rested on shelves. Inspected daily for any green tarnish spots that needed immediate attention before they spread.
Fact 10. Bed making followed strict order in servant routines. The housemaids stripped sheets and blankets each morning, shook them outdoors if possible to air them, then remade the bed, starting with the undersheet tucked tightly at the foot and sides. Blankets went on next, hospital corners folded precisely at each corner, counterpanes smoothed over the top. Pillows plumped and placed just so, the final touch a light pat to ensure no lumps showed. Each bed in the house received this same careful attention, one after another, the linen smoothed flat under steady hands.
Fact 11. In smaller middle-class homes where only one general servant worked, the day started around 6 in the morning with lighting the kitchen range. The maid carried a scuttle of coal from the cellar or shed, adding lumps carefully to the glowing embers left from the night before. She waited for the fire to steady, then filled heavy kettles from the pump or tap, placing them on the hob to heat slowly for washing water and tea. While the water warmed, she swept the stone-flagged kitchen floor with a stiff broom, pushing dust into a pile before scooping it into a bucket. The range top received a quick wipe with a damp cloth to remove overnight grease spots. Breakfast preparation followed, laying the table in the dining room with plain china plates, knives, and spoons set exactly parallel. She checked the milk jug for freshness, straining any bits through muslin if needed, then carried hot water upstairs in a jug for the family's morning wash. Every motion stayed measured and quiet, the same sequence repeating through seasons, the fire crackling softly as the house slowly woke. This single servant managed all these small beginnings alone, her hands moving steadily from one familiar task to the next without pause, until the family came down.
Fact 12. Boot blacking took place in the early hours or late evenings in many households. The housemaid or boot boy sat on a low stool in the servants' hall or scullery with a wooden boot jack to hold each pair steady. Blacking paste, made from lamp black mixed with vinegar or a commercial tin, was applied with a small brush in even layers over the leather. After a short wait for it to dry to a dull finish, vigorous buffing with a soft cloth brought up the shine, checked by holding the boot to the light for any missed dull patches. Muddy soles were scraped clean first with a blunt knife, then wiped with a damp rag. Pairs belonging to the master, mistress, and children were done daily or every other day, depending on wear. Gentlemen's boots often needed extra attention to the seams and heels. Once polished, boots were placed neatly on a rack or carried upstairs wrapped in cloth to avoid marks. The same quiet rhythm of applying paste, waiting, brushing, and buffing filled these moments, the faint smell of vinegar lingering in the air as the leather gleamed, ready for another day's walking.
Fact 13. Carrying coal formed a constant, repetitive part of daily maintenance in coal-burning Victorian homes. The scullery maid or housemaid fetched lumps from the coal hole or yard bin several times a day, using a metal scuttle that grew heavier with each fill. She lifted it carefully to avoid spilling dust on stairs or carpets, balancing it against her hip as she climbed to bedrooms, drawing rooms, or parlors. In each room, she added coal to the grate in small handfuls, arranging pieces around the existing fire so flames spread evenly without smoke. Empty scuttles returned downstairs for refilling, the process repeating as fires burned low. In winter, this happened more often, sometimes every hour in colder rooms. She checked the grate bars for clinkers, small hard lumps of waste, removing them with tongs before adding fresh fuel. Dust from the coal settled on her apron and hands, wiped away periodically with a cloth kept nearby. The steady clink of lumps dropping into the scuttle and the soft rustle as they settled became familiar background sounds, part of the house's quiet breathing through the day and into the evening.
Fact 14. Mending small household items occupied quiet afternoons for housemaids or the lady of the house in simpler homes. A work basket held needles, threads in various shades, patches of spare fabric, and scissors placed neatly on the table. She sat by a window for good light, examining tablecloths, napkins, or sheets for thin spots or small tears from regular use. A tear might be darned with tiny, even stitches matching the weave, pulling threads close so the repair stayed flat and invisible from a distance. Buttons loosened by daily fastening were resewn securely, thread knotted firmly underneath. Hems on aprons or curtains that had come undone received careful turning and stitching with small running stitches. She checked seams on pillowcases or towels too, reinforcing any weak areas before they frayed further. Each piece was folded neatly after mending and returned to the linen cupboard or drawer, inspected again next time for wear. This slow, methodical work with needle and thread repeated week after week, keeping linen serviceable longer in an era when replacements cost time and money. The gentle prick of needle through fabric and the soft pull of thread formed a soothing rhythm in the room.
Fact 15. Airing rooms happen daily in most Victorian houses to keep them fresh. The housemaid opened windows wide in unoccupied bedrooms or parlors, allowing cool air to circulate for an hour or more. She folded back bed covers or counterpanes, shaking pillows lightly and propping them against the headboard so bedding received airflow. In warmer months, she might hang feather beds or bolsters over a chair near the open window. Curtains were drawn back fully, and any rugs lifted slightly to let drafts reach underneath. While waiting, she dusted surfaces again, mantelpieces, tabletops, picture frames, with a soft cloth, removing any fresh soot or dust carried in by wind. Doors between rooms stayed ajar to encourage cross breezes. Later, she closed windows carefully, lowered sashes to prevent rain entry if clouds gathered, and smoothed everything back into place. This simple routine of opening, waiting, shaking, and closing repeated in each room on a schedule, helping ward off dampness and musty smells from coal smoke or closed-up spaces. The fresh air moved slowly through the house, carrying faint outdoor scents, before everything settled once more into quiet order.
Fact 16. In many Victorian middle-class kitchens, the cook or kitchen maid spent considerable time tending the large cast-iron range each morning. She rose early, around 5:30 or 6, and carried a bucket of ashes from the previous day's fire to the yard or dustbin outside. Returning indoors, she raked out any remaining clinkers with a poker, sweeping them into a separate pail for disposal later. Fresh kindling went in first, small dry sticks arranged in a loose pyramid, followed by larger pieces, and then a careful scoop of coal from the scuttle nearby. She struck a match, lit the paper underneath, and waited patiently as the flames caught and spread upward, adjusting the dampers slowly to control the draw without excess smoke. While the fire built, she wiped down the blacked parts of the range with a soft cloth to remove any overnight dust, checking the oven door hinges for tightness and the hot plates for even heat once ready. This same sequence repeated daily, the steady crackle of settling coal and the gradual warming of the kitchen forming a quiet background to the start of preparations for breakfast and the household's needs through the coming hours.
Fact 17. Knife cleaning occupied a regular slot in the daily or weekly routine for many servants, often the boot boy or scullery maid in smaller establishments. A wooden knife board, sometimes covered in a thin layer of emery powder or bath brick, rested on the scullery table. Each knife blade was laid flat and rubbed back and forth with even pressure, turning it over to treat both sides until the steel shone dull but clean. Handles of bone, wood, or ivory received a gentle wipe with a damp cloth to remove any grease spots, then dried thoroughly to prevent cracking. After cleaning, knives were inspected one by one, held to the light for spots or rust traces, before being arranged neatly in a wooden rack or drawer lined with baize. This task happened after meals when knives were used, or as a set weekly polish to maintain their condition over time. The repetitive motion of rubbing and checking, the faint scratch of powder on metal, continued quietly until the set was complete and returned to the sideboard ready for the next use in the dining room upstairs.
Fact 18. In households with gas lighting, the parlor maid or housemaid checked and trimmed mantles daily or every few days to keep flames steady and clean. She carried a small step stool and a box of spare mantles, delicate woven silk impregnated with chemicals, upstairs to each room. At the fixture, she turned off the gas tap carefully, removed the old mantle, if brittle or blackened, and brushed away any loose fragments with a soft feather duster. A new mantle slipped over the burner, lit briefly to set its shape into ash. Then the gas turned on low and adjusted gradually for an even glow without flickering. Chimneys of glass were wiped inside and out with a lint-free cloth, dampened in vinegar water to remove soot buildup, checked for cracks that might cause uneven burning. Shades or globes received a gentle polish before being replaced. This inspection moved room by room, the soft hiss of gas and the careful turning of taps repeating in the quiet house, ensuring light remained reliable for evenings, without sudden dimming or smell of unburned fuel.
Fact 19. Sweeping yards and area steps formed part of the outdoor maintenance routine in townhouses with basement kitchens. The scullery maid or general servant took a stiff yard broom and a dustpan early each morning or after rain. She swept fallen leaves, soot from chimneys, or general street dirt from the flagged area outside the back door, pushing debris into small piles before scooping it into a bucket for removal to the dustbin. Iron railings along the area received a quick brush to dislodge cobwebs or grime, wiped with a damp rag if needed to keep them from rusting in damp weather. Steps leading down from street level were scrubbed weekly with soft soap and water carried in a pail, brushed vigorously from top to bottom, then rinsed with clean water poured slowly so it drained away without pooling. She checked for loose stones or cracks that might trip someone, noting any for later repair. The same steady sweeping and scrubbing repeated through seasons, keeping the small outdoor space tidy and safe for deliveries or servants coming and going in their daily rounds.
Fact 20. Filling and lighting oil lamps took place in homes without gas, usually in the late afternoon as daylight faded. The housemaid carried a tray with a small oil can, wicks, matches, and scissors to each room. At the lamp table or bracket, she lifted the reservoir carefully, unscrewed the filler cap, and poured paraffin oil slowly from the can until it reached the marked line, wiping any spills immediately with a cloth to avoid smell or fire risk. Wicks were trimmed to an even half-inch with scissors, any charred edges snipped away so the flame burned cleanly without smoking. The glass chimney came off for wiping inside and out, checked for cracks, then replaced securely. Chimneys were sometimes soaked overnight in vinegar to loosen soot if very dirty. Once prepared, lamps were lit with a match held steady, the wick turned up gradually until the light steadied, then adjusted for brightness without glare. This quiet preparation repeated lamp by lamp through parlor, dining room, and bedrooms, the faint scent of oil and the soft glow building slowly as evening settled over the house.
Fact 21. In Victorian homes with servants, the morning tray for the mistress or master followed a quiet, unchanging order. The parlor maid or housemaid prepared it in the kitchen after the rain had warmed. She arranged a small silver tray with a linen cloth, placing a porcelain teacup and saucer, a matching small plate, a silver teaspoon, and a folded napkin exactly centered. Hot water came from the kettle in a matching jug, milk in a tiny jug kept cool overnight, and tea leaves measured into a teapot warmed first with a splash of boiling water. Thin slices of bread were toasted slowly over the fire, buttered while still warm, and cut into neat triangles arranged overlapping on the plate. A small pot of marmalade or preserve sat beside it, spoon resting across the top. She checked that nothing dripped or stained the cloth, then carried the tray upstairs carefully, balancing it level so the liquid stayed still. At the bedroom door she knocked softly, entered when called, placed the tray on a bedside table or lap table, and withdrew quietly after drawing curtains back a little to let in morning light. The same careful arrangement and slow carrying repeated every single day, the faint clink of china the only sound in the still house.
Fact 22. Starch making for collars, cuffs, and aprons happened once or twice a week in most households. The cook or housemaid mixed powdered starch, usually corn or potato, in a large basin with cold water, stirring slowly until it formed a smooth paste without lumps. She then poured on boiling water from the kettle in a thin stream, beating steadily with a wooden spoon as the mixture thickened and turned translucent. A pinch of borax or salt sometimes went in to help whiteness and stiffness. The hot starch rested in the basin, covered with a cloth to keep dust away, cooling gradually until lukewarm and ready for dipping. Collars and cuffs, already washed and blued, were dipped one by one, squeezed gently to remove excess, then shaken out and pinned to a line or laid flat on a table covered with an old sheet. She checked each piece for even coating, smoothing any thick spots with her fingers before they dried stiff. This slow stirring, waiting, dipping, and smoothing
filled a quiet corner of the kitchen or wash house, the faint starchy smell lingering as items hardened ready for ironing later.
Fact 23. Ironing day required careful preparation to keep clothes smooth and undamaged. The housemaid or laundry maid heated flat irons on the kitchen range or in a special stove, turning them occasionally so heat spread evenly through the heavy cast iron. She tested each one by holding it near her cheek or dropping water on it. If it hissed gently without spitting, it was ready. A thick blanket and old sheet covered the ironing table for cushioning. Garments were sprinkled lightly with water from a perforated bottle or dampened cloth, rolled loosely and left to rest so moisture spread through the fabric without soaking. She ironed in sections, sleeves first, then body, collars last, using steady pressure and smooth strokes along the weave to avoid shine or scorch marks. Any stubborn creases received a light press with a damp cloth between iron and fabric. After each piece, she hung it on a wooden horse or line to air, checking seams and hems for flatness before moving to the next item. The gentle thud of iron on board, the soft hiss of steam, and the slow turning of garments repeated through the afternoon in the warm laundry room.
Fact 24. In larger houses, the butler or footman polished plate and cutlery in the pantry each week. He sat at a long table covered with baize, laying out forks, spoons, ladles, and serving pieces in rows. A bowl of warm water with a little washing soda stood ready to soak tarnished items briefly. He rubbed each piece with a damp cloth dipped in plate powder, fine rouge or whiting mixed with water, working in small circles until the tarnish lifted. After a short wait, he buffed vigorously with a dry chamois leather, turning the item in the light to catch any remaining dull spots that needed another pass. Engraved crests or monograms received extra gentle attention, so details stayed sharp. Once gleaming, items were wrapped in tissue paper or soft cloth and placed back in the lined plate chest or drawers, arranged by size and use. The pantry stayed quiet during this task, the soft rasp of cloth on metal and the occasional clink of silver the only sounds, as the collection slowly returned to its polished state, ready for the next dinner or tea service.
Fact 25. Checking and refilling inkstands formed part of the quiet daily or weekly duties in studies, drawing rooms, or schoolrooms. The housemaid carried a small tray with an ink bottle, funnel, pen wipers, and blotting paper to each desk or writing slope. She opened the stand, often silver or glass with wells for black and red ink, and poured fresh ink slowly through the funnel until levels reached just below the rim, wiping any drips immediately with a cloth. Old ink residue around the edges was cleaned with a damp rag or small brush to prevent crusting. Pens were wiped clean, nibs inspected for rust or bends, and replaced if needed from a small stock kept in a drawer. Blotting paper was turned or replaced if stained, and pen wipers shaken out or washed. The stand closed carefully, checked that lids fit tightly to avoid evaporation or spills. This small, methodical inspection moved from room to room, the faint metallic scent of ink and the gentle clink of glass on tray repeating, as writing tools stayed ready for letters, household accounts, or lessons, without interruption.
Fact 26. In Victorian households, the weekly task of blacking the kitchen range kept it looking neat and functional. The kitchen maid or cook waited until the fire had died down completely after the evening meal, then removed any remaining ash with a small shovel into a bucket. She wiped the entire surface, hot plates, oven door, and side panels with a damp cloth to loosen any grease or soot. A thick paste of black lead polish, sometimes mixed with a little oil or vinegar, was applied next using a soft brush or rag in slow, even strokes across every inch of the cast iron. After letting it sit for a few minutes to set, she buffed it vigorously with a dry cloth or a special polishing brush until the metal gleamed with a deep, even shine. Edges and corners around knobs or hinges received extra care so no streaks showed. She checked the reflection in the polished surface from different angles, touching up any dull spots with another light application. Once finished, the range stayed cool overnight, ready for the morning fire. This quiet polishing ritual, done by lamplight in the empty kitchen, repeated every week without fail, the faint metallic smell of blacklead lingering softly in the air.
Fact 27. Carrying hot water jugs upstairs for morning washing followed a fixed pattern in most homes. The housemaid filled large enamel or copper jugs from the kitchen kettle once the range had heated sufficiently. She wrapped each jug in a thick cloth to protect her hands and prevent drips, then balanced a second smaller jug of cold water on a tray for mixing. Ascending the stairs slowly to avoid splashing, she placed the jugs on washstands in each bedroom, first the servants' rooms if separate, then family bedrooms. In each room, she poured a measured amount into the basin, checked the temperature by dipping a finger briefly, and adjusted with cold if too hot. Towels hung neatly on rails were straightened, soap dishes wiped if needed, and the slop pail positioned underneath for used water later. After setting everything ready, she withdrew quietly, leaving the door ajar for ventilation. The same careful carrying, pouring, and checking moved from floor to floor each morning, the gentle slosh of water inside the jugs, and the soft clink of porcelain the only sounds breaking the early stillness.
Fact 28. Organizing the linen cupboard took place regularly to keep sheets, towels, and tablecloths in good order. The housemaid or housekeeper opened the tall cupboard doors, usually in a cool upstairs passage or landing. She removed stacks one shelf at a time, shaking each piece gently to release any dust before refolding. Sheets were folded in precise thirds lengthwise, then rolled or squared neatly so edges aligned perfectly. Towels went in separate piles by size, hand, face, bath, arranged so the newest ones sat at the bottom to rotate use evenly. Tablecloths and napkins were checked for small stains or worn hems, set aside for mending if needed. Lavender sachets or pieces of soap tucked between layers kept moths away and added a faint fresh scent. She smoothed each pile flat with her hands before replacing it on its shelf, ensuring heavier items stayed lower and lighter ones higher. Doors closed firmly afterward to keep out damp air. This slow unfolding, shaking, folding, and stacking repeated every few weeks, maintaining the quiet order of the household's linens ready for daily or weekly changes.
Fact 29. Waiting for dough to rise occupied calm moments in many Victorian kitchens on baking days. The cook mixed flour, yeast, salt, and water or milk in a large earthenware bowl, kneading steadily on a floured board until the dough felt smooth and elastic under her palms. She shaped it into a round, placed it back in the greased bowl, and covered it with a damp cloth to prevent a skin forming. The bowl went near the warm range or in a sheltered corner away from drafts, where it rested undisturbed for 1 to 2 hours. During this time, she moved on to other tasks, peeling vegetables, scrubbing pots, but returned periodically to check progress, pressing a finger gently into the dough to see if it sprang back slowly, a sign it had doubled in size. If not ready, she left it longer, adjusting the cloth if it dried out. Once resined, she knocked it back down with firm punches, divided it into loaves or rolls, shaped them carefully, and set them to prove again on tins before baking. The patient waiting and gentle checking formed a soothing rhythm in the warm kitchen air.
Fact 30. Tending small window boxes or indoor plants provided a quiet routine in many homes, especially in townhouses with limited gardens. The parlor-maid or lady of the house carried a small watering can filled from the cistern or pump to each windowsill. She watered geraniums, ferns, or ivy slowly, letting drops soak into the soil.
without overflowing the saucers beneath pots. Dead leaves were pinched off with fingers, yellowed fronds snipped away with small scissors, and surfaces wiped with a damp cloth to remove dust that blocked light. Pots were turned occasionally so stems grew evenly toward the window. In winter, she moved tender plants farther from cold glass at night, covering them lightly with muslin if frost threatened. Soil was loosened gently with a stick now and then to keep it from compacting. This careful watering, snipping, wiping, and turning repeated 2 or 3 times a week, the soft patter of water and faint rustle of leaves adding a peaceful touch to the room as plants stayed green through seasons.
Fact 31. In many Victorian homes, the parlor maid spent quiet moments each afternoon arranging and dusting the drawing room ornaments. She carried a small tray lined with felt to hold fragile pieces safely. Starting from the mantelpiece, she lifted each item one at a time: a porcelain shepherdess, a small bronze clock, a pair of china vases, and wiped the base and underside with a soft chamois leather lightly dampened in warm water. The surface beneath received a gentle pass of the cloth to remove any fine soot that had settled since morning. She replaced each ornament exactly in its previous position, checking alignment against faint marks on the polished wood or faint shadows on the wallpaper. Lower shelves and side tables followed the same careful process: lifting, wiping, replacing, and straightening. Heavy items like framed photographs or small marble busts were dusted in place with a feather brush to avoid shifting them unnecessarily. After finishing, she stepped back to view the room from the doorway, ensuring nothing looked disturbed or out of place. This slow, methodical handling and checking repeated day after day, keeping the room's small treasures free of dust while preserving their familiar arrangement in the soft afternoon light.
Fact 32. Checking and winding clocks formed a steady weekly routine in most households. The butler, housekeeper, or sometimes the master himself carried a small key on a chain to each mantel, bracket, or long case clock. He opened the glass door or face gently, listening first to the tick to judge if it ran true. The winding key fitted into the hole for the time train and turned clockwise in slow, even turns, usually 30 or 40, until resistance showed the spring fully tensioned. A separate key wound the chime or strike mechanism if present, counting turns carefully to avoid overwinding. Pendulums on taller clocks were steadied with a finger if they had swung unevenly, and the hands adjusted forward or back by tiny movements if the time had drifted even a minute or two. Dust inside the case was brushed away lightly with a soft feather. After winding, he closed the door quietly, checked the second hand's sweep, and noted any unusual sounds for later attention. This patient turning, listening, and adjusting moved from room to room once a week, the soft clicks and steady talks continuing evenly through the house.
Fact 33. In kitchens, the pantry maid or cook organized spice jars and dry goods shelves regularly to keep everything accessible and fresh. She removed jars one by one from the wooden shelves: ground ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon sticks, cloves, peppercorns, and wiped each lid and label with a dry cloth to remove any flour dust or moisture rings. Contents were inspected by opening and smelling gently. If aroma had faded or clumping appeared, the jar was set aside for replacement. Fresh supplies from paper packets or tins were poured slowly into clean jars using a small funnel, tapped lightly to settle without air pockets, then sealed tightly. Labels were checked for clarity, rewritten in neat ink if faded. Shelves themselves received a wipe with a damp cloth, followed by thorough drying to prevent mold in the cool, dark space. Heavier items like sacks of flour or sugar stayed at floor level, lighter jars higher up in rows by type.
This careful emptying, inspecting, refilling, and arranging repeated every few weeks, maintaining the quiet order of the pantry so ingredients remained ready for daily cooking without search or waste.
Fact 34. Carrying laundry baskets between floors required steady balance and patience in multi-story homes. The housemaid or laundry maid gathered soiled items from bedrooms and bathrooms into a large wicker basket lined with calico to catch stray pins or buttons. She lifted the basket with both arms, resting it against her hip as she descended the back stairs slowly to avoid bumping walls or railings. In the washhouse or scullery, she set it down carefully on the stone floor, sorting contents into piles, whites, coloreds, delicates, checking pockets for forgotten items like coins or handkerchiefs. Clean laundry returned upstairs the same way, basket balanced level so folded linen stayed neat without creasing. On ironing days, extra trips carried dampened pieces down and starched collars back up, wrapped in cloth to protect them. Each journey followed the same measured pace, footsteps soft on the servants' stairs, the faint rustle of fabric inside the basket a constant sound during these quiet transfers through the house.
Fact 35. Tending to brass fittings around the home kept them bright without much effort. The housemaid carried a small brass polishing kit, a jar of paste, soft rags, and a brush to doorknobs, finger plates, bell pulls, and fire irons. She applied a thin layer of paste to each piece with a cloth, rubbing in small circles until tarnish lifted. After a brief wait, she buffed firmly with a clean, dry rag, turning the knob or lifting the handle to reach all sides evenly. Edges and crevices around screws received extra attention with the brush tip to remove any green verdigris. She checked the shine by viewing from an angle, reapplying paste only where dullness remained. Once polished, each fitting gleamed softly under lamplight or daylight. This gentle rubbing, weighting, and buffing moved methodically through hallways, doors, and fireplaces, repeating every week or two as exposure to hands and air slowly dulled the metal again. The faint lemony scent of the polish lingered briefly in each room afterward.
Fact 36. In Victorian households, the weekly airing of woolen blankets and heavy winter bedding followed a calm, unchanging pattern to keep them fresh without washing too often, since full laundering was a major undertaking. The housemaid or laundry maid carried each blanket or eiderdown from the bedroom linen cupboard or airing horse down to the yard or a sheltered balcony if the house had one. She draped the blanket carefully over a clean clothesline or wooden frame, making sure it hung straight and even so no creases formed from uneven weight. In fine, dry weather, she left it outside for several hours, turning it once or twice, so both sides caught the gentle breeze and faint sunlight. If the day turned damp, she brought it indoors to a warm passage or near an open window with a fire lit low in the grate nearby. While waiting, she shook out any loose dust or small particles with slow, deliberate movements, holding the edges and flicking gently rather than beating hard. Any small moth holes spotted during this handling were marked with a pin for later darning. After airing, she folded the blanket in wide accordion pleats to preserve the loft, then carried it back upstairs, placing it on the correct shelf with the folded edge facing outward for easy selection next time. This patient draping, turning, shaking, waiting, and refolding repeated through the household stock of blankets season after season, helping maintain their softness and warmth while avoiding unnecessary wear from frequent washing.
Fact 37. Polishing wooden furniture in the dining room and parlor occupied many quiet evenings for the parlor maid. She prepared a small tray with beeswax polish, a soft cloth for application, another for buffing, and a clean brush for carved details. Starting with the large mahogany table, she applied a thin layer of polish in slow circular motions, working along the grain to avoid streaks. She covered one section at a time, perhaps half the tabletop, then moved to the next, letting the first area sit for a few minutes so the wax softened the wood slightly. After the whole surface had received polish, she returned with the buffing cloth, rubbing firmly but steadily in long strokes until a soft sheen appeared. Chair legs, arms, and backs followed the same careful process, with the brush used gently in crevices around turned spindles or carved motifs to lift any dust trapped there. Sideboards and serving tables received equal attention, drawers pulled out briefly so insides could be wiped, and edges polished without missing spots. She checked the finish by running a finger lightly across the surface. If it felt smooth and slightly tacky but not sticky, the job was complete. Furniture was then left undisturbed overnight to harden fully before the family used the room again. This methodical applying, waiting, buffing, and inspecting moved piece by piece through the main rooms, the faint honey scent of beeswax settling softly as each surface regained its quiet glow.
Fact 38. In many kitchens, the daily task of scrubbing the deal table kept its surface clean and pale for food preparation. The scullery maid or cook waited until after breakfast clearing, then carried a bucket of hot water from the range boiler, adding a handful of soft soap flakes or soda crystals that dissolved slowly as she stirred. She dipped a stiff scrubbing brush into the soapy water and worked in straight lines along the grain of the pine or deal wood, applying firm but even pressure to lift any grease spots or crumbs embedded from chopping or rolling pastry. The brush moved methodically from one end of the long table to the other, rinsing frequently in the bucket so dirty water did not spread. After scrubbing, she poured clean hot water over the entire top, wiping it down with a coarse cloth wrung almost dry to remove suds completely. Edges and corners around legs received extra brushing to prevent buildup of grime in the joins. Finally, she dried the surface thoroughly with a fresh, dry cloth, checking by touch for any damp patches that might warp the wood over time. The table stayed bare and scrubbed-looking until the next meal preparations began, its pale color a sign of regular care. This steady scrubbing, rinsing, wiping, and drying repeated every single day in the warm kitchen, the soft swish of the brush and the gradual lightening of the wood becoming familiar background to the household's cooking rhythm.
Fact 39. Sorting and mending stockings formed a peaceful evening occupation for housemaids or the lady of smaller households. A work basket held woolen darning wool in various shades, needles with large eyes, a wooden darning egg or mushroom, and small scissors. She sat by the fire or a good lamp, taking each stocking from the mending pile one at a time. She slipped the egg inside to stretch the worn heel or toe smooth, then threaded a needle with matching wool and began weaving small, even stitches over thin spots, following the original knit pattern as closely as possible so the repair stayed flat and flexible. Holes were darned by creating a lattice of threads first in one direction, then crossing in the other, pulling each stitch gently to avoid puckering. After finishing a section, she turned the stocking inside out to check the underside for smoothness and trimmed any loose ends neatly. Pairs were matched again and folded with the darned areas hidden inside before returning to the drawer or stocking basket. This slow threading, weaving, checking, and folding continued piece by piece, the quiet click of the needle against the wooden egg and the soft rustle of wool filling the room, as worn stockings gradually became serviceable once more for daily wear.
Fact 40. In homes with coal fires, the daily removal and sifting of ashes helped maintain clean grates and efficient burning. The housemaid carried a metal ash pan and small shovel to each fireplace after the fire had burned low or gone out overnight. She scooped the cold ashes carefully into the pan, tapping the shovel lightly against the edge to dislodge clinging bits without raising dust clouds indoors. Larger clinkers, hard fused lumps, were picked out with tongs and set aside in a separate bucket for disposal or reuse in paths. The remaining fine ash went through a sifter outdoors or in the yard,
the mesh shaking gently so usable small cinders fell through for relighting the next fire, while dust collected below for the dustbin. She wiped the empty grate with a damp rag to remove any remaining soot, then laid fresh paper, kindling, and coal ready for evening or morning. This patient scooping, tapping, sifting, wiping, and preparing, repeated in every room with a hearth, the faint metallic clink of the shovel and the soft patter of ash through the sieve, marking these quiet moments of preparation before the next fire began its slow, steady burn.
Fact 41. In Victorian sculleries, the daily washing of crockery followed a deliberate and unhurried sequence after every meal. The scullery maid filled a large tin or wooden tub with hot water drawn from the range boiler, stirring in a measured amount of washing soda or soft soap until it dissolved into gentle suds. She stacked soiled plates, bowls, cups, and saucers beside the tub in order of size, then lowered each piece slowly into the water, letting it soak briefly so food remnants softened without scraping hard at first. Using a soft cloth or small brush, she wiped the inside and outside of every item in slow circular motions, paying extra attention to rims, handles, and any painted or transfer patterns that might wear if scrubbed too vigorously. Greasy items received a second dip in hotter water if needed. After washing, she transferred pieces to a second tub of clean rinsing water carried in from the pump or tap, swishing them gently to remove all traces of soap. Each item was lifted out, held over the tub to drain for a moment, then placed on a wooden draining rack or wiped dry immediately with a linen tea towel to prevent spotting on china or tarnish on metal. She checked rims and bases for any clinging residue, rewashing only what required it. The clean crockery was carried in small batches to the dresser or pantry shelves, arranged by type, plates in neat stacks, cups hung on hooks, so the next meal could draw from them easily. This patient soaking, wiping, rinsing, draining, drying, checking, and carrying, repeated 3 times daily in the quiet scullery, the soft clink of china against the rack, and the faint slosh of water creating a steady, soothing rhythm through the hours.
Fact 42. Maintaining feather pillows and bolsters involved regular, gentle care to preserve their shape and freshness without full washing, which was rare and disruptive. The housemaid carried each pillow or bolster to an open window or a well-ventilated landing on fine days. She laid it flat on a clean sheet spread over a table or chair, then patted and turned it slowly from all sides, pressing lightly with her palms to redistribute the feathers evenly inside the ticking. Any lumps were broken up by gentle kneading, working section by section, so the filling stayed uniform and airy. She shook the pillow vigorously but carefully outdoors if possible, holding the corners and flicking it so loose dust or small feathers drifted away on the breeze without scattering indoors. If the ticking showed faint stains from use, she dabbed them spot clean with a cloth dampened in mild soap solution, rinsing the spot with clear water and patting dry to avoid spreading moisture through the feathers. After airing and patting, she smoothed the case flat, checked seams for any small openings that might let feathers escape, and stitched tiny repairs if needed with fine needle and thread. Pillows returned to beds or the airing cupboard, placed with the stitched end tucked away. This calm sequence of carrying, patting, turning, shaking, spot cleaning, checking, and replacing repeated every few weeks for each bedroom set, keeping the pillow soft and even through months of nightly use. Fact 43. In many homes, the butler or footman spent quiet afternoons brushing and folding gentlemen's coats and trousers after wear. He hung each garment on a shaped wooden hanger in the gentleman's dressing room or a dedicated wardrobe area, first inspecting the shoulders, lapels, and cuffs for loose threads or small spots. Using a soft clothes brush with natural bristles, he brushed downward in long, even strokes from collar to hem, removing dust, lint, or stray hairs caught in the wool or tweed. Collars and cuffs received extra gentle brushing to lift any embedded grime without flattening the fabric. If a faint mark appeared, he moistened a corner of clean cloth with water or diluted vinegar and dabbed lightly, never rubbing, then brushed again once dry. Trousers were turned inside out for brushing the seat and inside legs where wear accumulated most. After brushing, he folded trousers carefully along the crease line, pressing the fold flat with his hands before laying them over a trouser rack or hanger bar. Coats were left hanging to air, sleeves smoothed straight. Garments were checked once more for any overlooked spots before being returned to the wardrobe in their usual place. This methodical brushing, dabbing, folding, smoothing, and checking continued garment by garment, the soft whisper of bristles on fabric filling these peaceful moments of care.
Fact 44. The routine of filling and trimming paraffin lamps continued in homes without gas well into the ancient era, especially in rural or smaller townhouses. Late each afternoon, the housemaid prepared a tray with a metal oil can, spare wicks rolled in paper, small scissors, matches, and clean cloths. She carried it room by room to every lampstand or bracket. At each one, she lifted the reservoir from its base, unscrewed the cap slowly, and poured fresh paraffin from the can in a thin, steady stream until the level sat just below the fill line, tilting the reservoir gently to avoid bubbles. Any drips on the outside were wiped away at once. The old wick was pulled up, charred edges trimmed evenly to about half an inch with the scissors, so the flame would burn clean and steady without smoking. She threaded a fresh wick if the current one looked too short or frayed, pushing it down through the burner tube until it sat level. The glass chimney was removed, wiped inside and out with a dry cloth to clear soot, inspected for fine cracks, and replaced securely. Once prepared, she lit the lamp with a match held close, turning the wick wheel gradually until the flame settled to a soft, even glow, then adjusted it lower for daytime or higher as dusk fell. This careful pouring, trimming, wiping, lighting, and adjusting repeated lamp after lamp through parlors, hallways, and bedrooms, the faint oil scent and gentle hiss of the wick becoming part of the house settling into evening quiet.
Fact 45. In Victorian larders and pantries, the weekly task of checking and rearranging preserved foods kept supplies fresh and orderly. The cook or housekeeper opened the cool, dim cupboard or stone-shelved larder, carrying a small lantern or candle for light. She removed jars of pickles, chutneys, jams, bottled fruits, and potted meats one shelf at a time, setting them on a clean table nearby. Each jar was wiped with a dry cloth to remove any condensation or dust, the lid checked for tightness by giving it a gentle quarter turn, and the seal inspected for signs of leakage or bulging that might indicate spoilage. Dates or labels were read quietly, older items moved to the front for earlier use. Freshly made preserves from the week's bottling were placed at the back, so rotation happened naturally. Stone crocks of butter or lard were skimmed if a crust had formed, surfaces smoothed, and cloths replaced if damp. Hanging hams or bacon were turned to expose different sides to the cool air. Shelves themselves received a quick wipe with a cloth dampened in vinegar water, then dried thoroughly to discourage mold. Everything returned to its shelf in the same neat rows, heavier jars lower down, lighter ones higher. This slow removal, wiping, checking, rearranging, and replacing, repeated every week or so, the faint vinegar tang and soft clink of glass preserving the quiet order of the household's winter stores.
Fact 46. In many Victorian households, the parlor maid devoted quiet mornings to sweeping and dusting the main staircase carpets and banisters. She began at the top landing, carrying a soft bristled carpet broom, dustpan, and small hand brush downstairs step by step. Each stair received slow, even strokes of the broom from tread to riser, pushing fine dust and any small threads toward the center, where they could be gathered easily. She paused after every few steps to sweep the collected dust into the pan, tapping it gently against the edge to settle contents without scattering. Banister rails and newel posts were wiped with a slightly damp cloth wrung almost dry, removing fingerprints or faint smudges from daily hands, then dried immediately with a soft dry cloth to restore the polished wood's quiet sheen. Brass stair rods, if present, were checked for looseness, each one lifted slightly, wiped underneath with the cloth, and replaced snugly so the carpet stayed flat without bunching. She worked downward methodically, one flight at a time, so the upper stairs remained clean while she finished below. After reaching the hall, she emptied the dustpan into the outdoor bin, shook out the broom outdoors, and returned upstairs to check that no stray dust had resettled on the freshly swept treads. This patient sweeping, wiping, tapping, lifting, and checking repeated every morning or every other day depending on foot traffic, the soft whisk of bristles on carpet, and the gentle clink of brass rods becoming familiar sounds in the still house as daylight slowly filtered through the hall windows.
Fact 47. The weekly task of cleaning silver photograph frames and small mirrored trays occupied calm afternoons for housemaids in homes that displayed family portraits. She prepared a tray with plate powder, warm water, soft rags, a small brush, and chamois leather. Each frame was lifted carefully from mantel or side table, laid flat on base to avoid scratches. She mixed a thin paste of powder and water, applied it with a cloth in small sections over the silver surface, rubbing gently in circles to lift tarnish without pressing too hard on the glass or delicate edging. After a short wait, the paste dried to a dull film. She brushed it away lightly, then buffed the metal with firm strokes of the chamois until it gleamed softly. The glass front was wiped with a separate lint-free cloth, dampened only slightly in clean water, dried in overlapping strokes to prevent streaks, and checked by tilting toward the light for any remaining spots. Backing cardboard or velvet was dusted gently without touching it fragile. Frames were returned to their exact position, aligned with any faint marks on the surface, so the arrangement looked undisturbed. This slow applying, waiting, brushing, buffing, wiping, and replacing continued frame by frame through drawing room and hallway, the faint metallic scent of polish and the quiet reflection in freshly cleaned silver adding a subtle brightness to familiar faces captured long ago.
Fact 48. In Victorian kitchens, the daily tending of the salt cellar, pepper pot, and mustard pot kept condiments ready without clumping or spoilage. The kitchen maid carried the small silver or glass sets to the scullery sink after clearing the table. She unscrewed or lifted lids one by one, emptied any remaining contents into a saucer for inspection, checking for dampness or hardening that might indicate moisture had entered. Damp salt was spread thinly on a plate near the range to dry slowly in the gentle warmth, then crushed lightly with the back of a spoon before refilling. Pepper was sifted through fine muslin if lumpy, fresh grounds added from the pantry jar using a small scoop tapped gently to settle evenly. Mustard pots, often with a blue glass liner, were rinsed with warm water, wiped dry inside and out, and refilled from the dry powder tin, mixed fresh with water or vinegar to a smooth paste, stirred slowly until no dry pockets remained. Lids were polished lightly with a dry cloth if silver, checked for tight fit to keep air out. The set was arranged neatly on a small tray or cruet stand, carried back to the dining room sideboard or kitchen dresser. This careful emptying, checking, drying, sifting, mixing, refilling, polishing, and carrying repeated daily or every few days. The faint vinegary tang and soft clink of glass liners, part of the quiet preparation for the next meal.
Fact 49. Waiting for flat irons to heat properly formed a patient interlude on laundry days in most homes. The laundry maid or housemaid placed several heavy cast iron flat irons on the kitchen range hob or in a special iron stand over the fire, turning each one every few minutes with a thick cloth pad to protect her hands. She tested readiness by holding an iron near her cheek. The warmth should feel steady but not scorching, or by sprinkling a drop of water on the base. If it danced and hissed briefly before vanishing, the heat was right for most fabrics. Too hot, and she moved the iron to a cooler part of the hob to rest a while. Too cool, and it returned closer to the flames. While waiting, she prepared the next garment, dampening linen or cotton lightly from a perforated bottle, rolling it loosely in a bundle so moisture distributed evenly without soaking through. She smoothed the ironing blanket and sheet over the table, checked for any stray pins, and arranged sleeves, collars, and body pieces in order of need. Once the iron felt ready, she lifted it carefully by the handle, tested the base on a scrap cloth first to ensure no scorch, then began pressing in long, even strokes along the weave. This calm cycle of placing, turning, testing, waiting, preparing, lifting, and pressing repeated through the afternoon, the soft hiss of water drops and the gradual warming scent of heated metal filling the laundry space.
Fact 50. In smaller Victorian homes without full-time gardeners, the lady of the house, or a maid, tended indoor ferns and aspidistras with quiet regularity. She carried a small watering can with a rose spout and a saucer to catch drips to each plant stand or windowsill. Water was poured slowly in a thin stream around the edge of the pot, so it soaked downward evenly without pooling on the surface or running over the rim. Excess in the saucer was emptied after a few minutes to prevent root rot in the cool, shaded rooms where these plants thrived. Leaves were wiped gently one by one with a soft, damp cloth to remove fine coal dust or household soot that settled despite closed windows, turning each frond carefully to reach both sides without bruising. Brown or yellow tips were snipped away with small scissors close to the stem, so the cut stayed neat. Pots were rotated slightly every week or two to encourage even growth toward the light. Soil was loosened lightly with a thin stick now and then to improve drainage without disturbing roots. This gentle pouring, wiping, snipping, turning, emptying, and loosening, repeated 2 or 3 times weekly, the soft patter of water and faint rustle of fronds, bringing a touch of steady green calm to parlor corners through seasons of smoke and fog outside.
Fact 51. In Victorian homes, the housemaid often spent quiet mid-mornings tending to the bedroom fireplaces after the family had risen and left their rooms. She carried a small coal scuttle, poker, tongs, brush, and dustpan up the back stairs to each unoccupied bedroom. At the hearth, she first removed any remaining overnight ash with the small shovel, scooping it slowly into the pan so no fine particles drifted upward into the air. Larger pieces of unburnt coal or cinders were picked out with the tongs and set aside in the scuttle for reuse if still viable. The grate bars were swept clean with the soft brush, then wiped with a rag lightly dampened in vinegar water to prevent rust spots from forming on the iron. She arranged fresh kindling in a neat pyramid over crumpled paper, added 2 or 3 small lumps of coal placed carefully around the edges so flames could catch evenly without excessive smoke when lit later. The fire screen was straightened if it had shifted, and the hearth rug smoothed flat beneath it. Any soot marks on the surround tiles were dabbed gently with the damp cloth, then dried with a separate dry one to avoid streaks. After finishing, she checked the room once more, windows slightly ajar for fresh air if the day allowed, curtains tied back neatly, before carrying the full ashpan and tools downstairs to empty outdoors. This methodical removal, sweeping, wiping, arranging, straightening, dabbing, checking, and carrying, repeated bedroom by bedroom in the calm morning hours, the faint metallic scrape of the shovel and soft rustle of kindling the only sounds as each hearth waited patiently for evening use.
Fact 52. The routine care of leather-bound books in drawing room or study shelves required patient attention every few weeks to keep them supple and free of dust. The parlor maid or housekeeper carried a soft goat hair brush, clean cotton gloves, a small bottle of leather conditioner made from neat's foot oil, or a homemade mix of lanolin and vinegar, and soft cloths to the bookcase. She removed volumes one shelf at a time, wearing the gloves to avoid transferring skin oils to the bindings. Each book was brushed gently from spine to foredge, dislodging fine dust that had settled along the tops and in the grooves of gilt lettering. If the leather appeared dry or cracked, she applied a tiny amount of conditioner to a cloth, rubbing it in with slow, circular motions over small sections of the spine and boards, letting it absorb gradually without saturating the material. Excess was buffed away immediately with a dry cloth, so no stickiness remained. Pages were fanned lightly to release trapped dust, but never bent backward. Books returned to the shelf in their original order, spines aligned flush so no volumes leaned or protruded unevenly. She stepped back to view the row from a slight distance, adjusting any that looked out of place. This careful brushing, applying, rubbing, buffing, fanning, replacing, aligning, and checking continued shelf by shelf, the faint scent of leather and oil settling quietly as the collection remained protected from the dry air and coal smoke of the era. Fact 53.
In many kitchens, the daily task of skimming stock or soup pots kept broths clear and flavorful without hurry. The cook waited until the pot had simmered gently for an hour or more after adding bones, vegetables, and water. She lifted the heavy lid slowly, setting it aside on a trivet. A long-handled metal spoon or small ladle was used to skim the surface in slow, shallow sweeps, gathering the grayish foam or small fat globules that rose during cooking. Each spoonful was transferred to a small bowl held nearby, the spoon wiped on a cloth between passes so no residue fell back in. She worked around the edges first, where scum collected most, then across the center, repeating until the liquid looked almost clear, with only tiny bubbles breaking the surface. If herbs or spices floated loose, they were skimmed too or pushed aside with the spoon. The pot was covered again loosely to allow steam to escape, while simmering continued at a low bubble. This patient lifting, skimming, wiping, repeating, and covering happened several times during the long cooking process, the soft plop of the spoon and faint steam rising, creating a steady, soothing rhythm in the warm kitchen as the stock slowly deepened in color and flavor for the evening meal.
Fact 54. Carrying trays of afternoon tea to the drawing room followed a fixed and careful order in most households. The parlor maid arranged a silver or china tray in the kitchen with a small teapot warmed first, matching cups and saucers stacked neatly, a milk jug, sugar basin with tongs, teaspoons aligned parallel, thin slices of lemon on a small dish if preferred, and a plate of plain biscuits or thinly cut bread and butter folded into triangles. She checked that the teapot lid sat securely and no drips marred the tray cloth. Lifting the tray with both hands, she balanced it level against her shoulder or at waist height, walking slowly up the main stairs or through corridors to avoid any sudden tilt that might spill hot liquid. At the drawing room door, she knocked softly, entered when called, and placed the tray on a low table near the hostess or a side table if guests were present. Cups were set out one by one, handles facing the same direction, saucers positioned beneath. She poured a little milk into each cup first, if that was the custom, then tea through a strainer held steady over each one, stopping at the agreed level. Sugar was offered quietly with the tongs. After serving, she withdrew silently, leaving the tray within easy reach. The same measured carrying, balancing, placing, pouring, and withdrawing repeated every afternoon, the faint clink of porcelain and soft rustle of the tray cloth part of the house's gentle daily cadence.
Fact 55. In Victorian homes, the weekly brushing of outdoor doormats and hall mats helped keep dirt from spreading indoors. The housemaid carried each heavy coir or fiber mat from the front door, back door, or hall to the yard or area steps. She draped the mat over a low wall or line if possible, or laid it flat on clean flags. Using a stiff bass broom, she swept both sides vigorously but steadily, working from center to edges so loose soil, leaves, sand, or small stones fell away in small piles. She turned the mat over and repeated the process on the underside, where embedded grit often hid. After sweeping, she shook the mat firmly by the corners, holding it at arm's length and flicking it several times, so remaining particles scattered outward without blowing back toward the house. Any stubborn mud spots were dabbed with a damp cloth, never soaked, then left to dry in the air. Once clean, she carried the mat back inside, positioned it exactly in its usual place, front mat aligned with the threshold, hall mat centered under the coat stand, and pressed it flat with her foot to settle it. This calm sequence of carrying, draping, sweeping, turning, shaking, dabbing, replacing, and pressing
repeated for every entrance mat in the house, the rhythmic whisk of the broom and soft thud of shaking, keeping pathways tidy season after season.
Fact 56. In many Victorian households, the kitchen maid carried out the slow, careful task of peeling and preparing root vegetables for the day's meals each morning. She sat at the scrubbed deal table with a small, sharp knife, a bowl of cold water, and a large basin for scraps. Potatoes were taken one by one from the sack or bin, rinsed under the pump to remove loose earth, then peeled in thin, steady strips, turning the vegetable slowly in her hand so the skin came away evenly without wasting much flesh. Any small eyes or green spots were cut out carefully with the knife tip. Peeled potatoes dropped into the water basin to prevent browning while she worked through the pile. Carrots followed the same gentle rhythm, tops trimmed with a quick snip, outer skin scraped away with the blunt side of the knife or a small scraper, then rinsed and placed in fresh water. Turnips or parsnips received similar attention, peeled thickly where the skin was tough, cut into even chunks later if needed for boiling or roasting. Scraps collected in the basin went to the compost heap or pig bucket if the household kept animals. She checked each vegetable for softness or sprouting before including it, setting aside any doubtful ones for immediate use or discard. After finishing, she carried the full basin of prepared pieces to the range, drained them slowly in a colander, and left them ready for the cook to add to pots or trays. This patient rinsing, peeling, turning, cutting, checking, draining, and carrying repeated daily in the quiet kitchen, the soft scrape of knife on skin and faint plop of vegetables into water forming a steady background to the start of cooking hours.
Fact 57. The weekly polishing of brass candlesticks and lamp bases kept them bright for evening use in parlors and hallways. The housemaid prepared a small tray with brass polish, soft rags, a narrow brush for crevices, and a clean chamois lever. Each candlestick was carried from its usual place, mantel, side table, or hall console, and laid on the tray. She applied a thin layer of polish with a cloth, working in small sections over the base, stem, and drip pan, rubbing gently in circles to lift any tarnish or finger marks without scratching the metal. Ornate pieces with chased patterns received extra care, the brush dipped lightly in polish and used to reach into grooves and around small decorations, so no dull patches remained hidden. After a brief wait for the polish to haze, she buffed vigorously with the chamois, turning the candlestick slowly to catch every angle under the light until the brass glowed with a warm, even sheen. Bases were checked for stability, any small dents noted but left untouched unless severe. Once polished, each piece was wiped free of residue with a dry cloth, then returned carefully to its exact spot, wick trimmed if needed, and any wax strips scraped away with a blunt knife edge. This methodical, applying, rubbing, weighting, brushing, buffing, turning, checking, and replacing, continued candlestick by candlestick through the main rooms, the faint lemony smell of polish and soft gleam of restored brass settling quietly as daylight faded.
Fact 58. In Victorian homes, the daily airing of mattresses helped keep bedding fresh and free from dampness in an era of coal fires and limited ventilation. The housemaid stripped the bed completely after the occupant rose, folding sheets and blankets neatly on a chair. She lifted the heavy horsehair or flock mattress with both hands, carried it to an open window or balcony, if the house allowed, or propped it upright against the wall near an open sash in cooler weather. The mattress rested there for an hour or longer, one side facing the incoming air first, then turned carefully so the other side received equal exposure. She patted the surface gently with her palms to redistribute filling and break up any slight compression from overnight use, working from center to edges in slow, even presses. Any faint musty smell was allowed to drift away on the breeze. If spots appeared from spills, she dabbed them lightly with a cloth dampened in vinegar water, never soaking the ticking, then left the area to dry fully in the air current.
After airing, she smoothed the mattress back onto the bed frame, checking that it sat level without sagging at corners, before remaking the bed with fresh linens tucked tightly. This calm lifting, carrying, propping, patting, turning, dabbing, smoothing, and replacing, repeated for every bed in the house on dry mornings, the soft thud of padding and gentle movement of air through the room, helping maintain comfort through seasons.
Fact 59. The quiet routine of sorting household linens for mending took place regularly in the upstairs workroom or a sunny corner of a bedroom. The housekeeper or senior housemaid carried a basket of items needing attention: sheets with worn hems, pillowcases with small tears, towels fraying at edges, tablecloths showing thin patches, from the linen cupboard to a table covered with an old cloth. She unfolded each piece slowly, spreading it flat to inspect by holding it to the light or running fingers along seams and surfaces. Thin areas were marked with a pin or chalk dot, small holes threaded with matching cotton for darning. She threaded a needle with fine cotton or linen thread, beginning repairs with tiny running stitches to reinforce weak spots or weave over holes in a lattice pattern that matched the original fabric as closely as possible. Edges of hems were turned under twice and stitched evenly so no raw threads showed. After finishing a piece, she refolded it neatly, pressed the folds flat with her hands, and placed it in a separate pile for return to the cupboard or immediate use. Damaged items beyond simple repair were set aside for cutting into dusters or rags. This patient unfolding, inspecting, marking, threading, stitching, refolding, pressing, and sorting continued piece by piece through the basket, the soft prick of needle through fabric and gentle rustle of linens creating a peaceful rhythm in the room as the household stock stayed serviceable longer. Fact 60. In many Victorian kitchens, the cook or maid spent calm moments each week checking and reorganizing the crockery cupboard to prevent chips and keep sets complete. She opened the tall dresser doors, removed stacks of plates, bowls, and dishes shelf by shelf, setting them carefully on the table lined with an old towel to cushion any accidental knocks. Each piece was held to the light and turned slowly in her hands, inspecting rims for hairline cracks, bases for crazing, and handles for looseness that might cause breakage during use. Slightly chipped items were set aside for servants' use or discard, while perfect ones were wiped gently with a dry cloth to remove any faint dust that had settled inside the cupboard. She rearranged stacks by size and pattern, dinner plates at the bottom for stability, smaller side plates higher up, soup bowls grouped together, so weight distributed evenly and reaching for daily items remained easy. Matching sets were kept together, odd pieces noted for possible replacement on the next market visit. Shelves themselves received a quick wipe with a damp cloth, followed by thorough drying to avoid damp spots encouraging mold. Everything returned to its place with soft clinks of china settling, doors closed firmly afterward. This slow removal, inspecting, turning, wiping, rearranging, noting, wiping, and replacing, repeated every few weeks, the faint ceramic scent and gentle handling preserving the quiet order of the household's everyday tableware.
Fact 61. In Victorian households, the scullery maid often devoted early evenings to the slow, methodical washing of saucepans and heavy cooking pots after dinner service had finished. She filled the deep stone sink with hot water from the range boiler, adding a generous handful of washing soda that dissolved gradually as she stirred with a long wooden stick. Each pot was lowered carefully into the water, allowing stubborn grease or burnt residues to soften over several minutes before any scrubbing began. Using a chain pot scourer or coarse cloth, she worked around the inside and outside in steady circular motions, applying even pressure to lift scorched patches without scratching the tin lining or iron too deeply. Handles and rims received extra attention, wiped thoroughly so no food particles clung in the joins. After scouring, she rinsed the pot under a stream from the pump or in a second basin of clean hot water, tilting it slowly to let suds drain away completely. The exterior was wiped dry immediately with a coarse towel to prevent rust on cast iron,
while tin-lined pans were left to air upside down on the draining rack so moisture evaporated from the seams. She checked each one by running a finger along the base. If smooth and free of residue, it was ready for the next day's use. Clean pots were carried in small groups to their hooks or shelves above the range, arranged by size so larger ones stayed lower and smaller ones higher for easy reach. This patient soaking, scouring, rinsing, tilting, wiping, checking, carrying, and hanging repeated pot after pot in the dim lamplight of the scullery, the soft clank of metal against stone and faint hiss of hot water creating a quiet close to the kitchen's long day. Fact 62. The routine weekly care of window curtains in parlors and bedrooms helped keep heavy fabrics from fading or collecting dust too quickly. The housemaid carried a pair of long-handled curtain poles or simply used a stepladder to reach the high poles. She unhooked the curtains one panel at a time, lowering them gently onto a clean sheet spread across the floor to catch any loose dust. Each panel was shaken outdoors if the weather permitted, holding the top hem and flicking downwards several times so particles drifted away on the breeze rather than resettling indoors. Back inside, she brushed the fabric lightly with a soft clothes brush from top to bottom, following the nap of velvet or the weave of damask so no pile flattened unevenly. Any small loose threads were snipped close with fine scissors, never pulled. If faint soot marks appeared near the edges, she dabbed them carefully with a cloth barely dampened in diluted vinegar, blotting rather than rubbing, then left the spot to dry naturally. After brushing, she refolded the curtains along their original pleats, pressed the folds flat with her hands, and carried them back to the window. She rehung each panel slowly, smoothing the gathers evenly along the pole or rings so they fell straight without bunching at the top. Poles were wiped with a dry cloth while the curtains were down, brass rings checked for smoothness. This calm unhooking, shaking, brushing, snipping, dabbing, refolding, carrying, rehanging, smoothing, and checking moved window by window through the house, the soft swish of fabric and gentle rustle of pleats preserving the quiet dignity of each room's drapery through seasons of coal smoke and sunlight.
Fact 63. In many Victorian studies or small libraries, the daily task of dusting bookshelves required careful handling to protect both volumes and the wood. The parlor maid carried a soft feather duster, clean cotton gloves, and a slightly damp cloth wrung almost dry to the room. She began at the top shelf, wearing the gloves to keep natural oils from her hands off the leather or cloth bindings. The feather duster swept lightly along the tops of rows first, dislodging fine dust that had settled overnight, then moved downward in slow strokes across spines without pressing hard enough to bend them. Every few shelves, she paused to wipe the actual shelf surface with the barely damp cloth, removing any remaining film of soot or dust, then dried it immediately with a separate dry cloth so no moisture lingered to warp the wood. Books were not pulled out unless obviously dusty. Instead, she tilted each one forward slightly with a gloved finger to dust behind it, then eased it back into place aligned with its neighbors. Gilt lettering on spines received the lightest possible touch of the feather only. After finishing a shelf, she stepped back to view the row, adjusting any volume that protruded even a fraction so the line looked even from across the room. This gentle sweeping, tilting, wiping, drying, easing, aligning, and checking continued shelf by shelf in the quiet study, the faint whisper of feathers on leather and soft creak of wood settling as the collection remained orderly and protected day after day.
Fact 64. The patient daily tending of the kitchen range fire through the afternoon kept heat steady for ongoing cooking without sudden flare-ups or dying down. The cook or kitchen maid carried a small coal scuttle and poker to the range every hour or so once the main midday meal had passed. She opened the fire door carefully, using the poker to rake through the burning coal and break up any clinkers that had formed, pushing them to the side grate where they fell into the ash pan below. Fresh lumps of coal were added in small handfuls, 3 or 4 at a time, placed toward the back and sides, so flames spread gradually rather than bursting forward with too much smoke. The damper was adjusted slightly, opened a fraction more if the fire needed reviving, or closed a little if it burned too hot, waiting a few minutes each time to observe how the flames responded before touching it again. She wiped the front bars and hot plates with a damp rag to remove any spilled grease, checking that no ash had blown onto the hob. If the oven was in use, she opened the door briefly to feel the heat oval, closing it quickly to retain warmth. After tending, she closed the fire door softly, wiped her hands on her apron, and returned the scuttle to its place near the coal hole. This calm raking, adding, adjusting, waiting, wiping, feeling, closing, and returning repeated through the long afternoon, the steady crackle of settling coal and soft hiss of dampers maintaining the kitchen's gentle, constant warmth for simmering pots and slow baking until evening.
Fact 65. In Victorian households, the weekly inspection and tidying of the hall stand and coat rack kept outer garments orderly and ready for use. The housemaid carried a small brush, soft cloth, and sometimes a bottle of leather conditioner to the entrance hall. She removed each coat, cape, or jacket from its peg one by one, laying it flat over a chair back or table. Using the brush, she swept downward along the shoulders, sleeves, and back in long strokes to remove dust, lint, or small hairs that had collected from outdoor wear. Collars and cuffs were brushed extra gently to lift any embedded grime without flattening the fabric. If leather trim or boots stood nearby, she applied a thin layer of conditioner to cracked areas with a cloth, rubbing it in slowly until absorbed, then buffed lightly to a soft sheen. Umbrellas were shaken gently if damp, stands wiped inside to remove any pooled water, and hooks checked for looseness, tightened with a small screwdriver if needed. After brushing, she hung each garment back in its usual place, smoothing sleeves straight and collars turned down neatly so nothing looked crumpled. The floor beneath received a quick sweep to collect fallen particles. This methodical removing, brushing, applying, rubbing, buffing, shaking, wiping, tightening, rehanging, smoothing, and sweeping repeated for every item on the stand, the soft whisk of bristles and faint scent of leather conditioner leaving the hall entry calm and presentable for the next arrival or departure.
Fact 66. In many Victorian households, the housemaid carried out the quiet daily task of emptying and cleaning bedroom slop pails after the family had washed and dressed. She moved from room to room with a covered enamel slop bucket and a small jug of clean water. At each bedside stand, she lifted the porcelain chamber pot carefully from its cabinet or under the bed, poured its contents slowly into the slop bucket so nothing splashed, then rinsed the pot with a measured splash of water from the jug, swirling it gently to loosen any residue. The inside was wiped with a cloth kept solely for this purpose, wrung almost dry to remove any remaining film without leaving streaks. She checked the pot for hairline cracks or chips along the rim that might cause leaks later, setting aside any damaged ones for replacement from the storeroom. The slop bucket, now fuller, was carried downstairs with steady steps to the outdoor privy or yard gully, emptied in small portions to avoid overflow, then rinsed under the pump and left inverted to drain. Fresh chamber pots were returned to their places, positioned neatly under the washstand or in the nightstand drawer. This calm sequence of lifting, pouring, rinsing, swirling, wiping, checking, carrying, emptying, and replacing, repeated bedroom by bedroom each morning, the soft gurgle of water and faint clink of porcelain the only sounds in the still upper floors as the house prepared for the day.
Fact 67. The weekly care of woolen blankets involved patient folding and storage to prevent creasing and moth damage in the linen cupboard. The housekeeper or housemaid carried each blanket from the airing horse or bedroom to a large table covered with clean calico. She shook the blanket outdoors first if the weather was dry, holding opposite corners and flicking it gently several times so any loose fibers or dust drifted away. Back inside, she spread it flat, smoothed the surface with her palms from center to edges to even the nap, then folded it in wide accordion pleats, usually thirds lengthwise, then halves or thirds crosswise, so the finished bundle stayed compact without sharp creases that might weaken the weave over time. Lavender sachets or small bars of plain soap were tucked into the folds to deter moths, placed near the center rather than edges to avoid staining. Each folded blanket was wrapped loosely in a length of unbleached muslin or old sheet to protect it from dust, then carried to the cupboard shelf, stacked with heavier ones at the bottom for stability and lighter ones higher up. She checked labels or marked corners if different weights or colors needed distinguishing later. Doors closed firmly afterward to keep the space cool and dark. This slow shaking, smoothing, folding, tucking, wrapping, carrying, stacking, and checking continued through the household's blanket supply every few weeks, the soft rustle of wool and faint lavender scent preserving warmth and order for colder months ahead.
Fact 68. In Victorian kitchens, the cook spent calm intervals each day stirring and watching simmering pots of porridge, stew, or stock to prevent sticking without rushing the process. She stood at the range with a long wooden spoon, lifting the heavy lid of the pot every 10 or 15 minutes to release steam and check progress. The contents were stirred slowly in wide figure-8 motions from bottom to top, scraping the base gently to loosen any settling particles before they scorched. If the mixture thickened too quickly, she added a small ladle of water or stock from a nearby jug, poured in gradually while stirring so the consistency stayed even. Heat was adjusted by nudging the damper a fraction, opened slightly for more draw if the simmer weakened, closed a touch if bubbles rose too vigorously. She tasted occasionally with a clean spoon, noting flavor development without adding seasoning yet, simply observing how ingredients softened and melded over hours. The pot was covered again loosely after each check to retain moisture while allowing excess steam to escape. Nearby vegetables or herbs waited in bowls, added only when the base reached the right stage. This patient lifting, stirring, scraping, adding, adjusting, tasting, covering, and waiting repeated through the long cooking day, the soft bubble of liquid and gentle scrape of wood against iron, maintaining a steady, soothing presence in the warm kitchen as meals slowly took shape.
Fact 69. The daily polishing of boots and shoes in the servants' hall or boot room followed a fixed, unhurried routine for the boot boy or housemaid. Pairs were collected from hallways or bedrooms in a basket lined with old cloth to catch mud. Each boot or shoe was placed on a wooden boot jack to hold it steady. Muddy soles were scraped first with a blunt knife, working from heel to toe so dirt fell into a tray below. The leather upper was wiped with a damp rag to remove surface grime, then dried thoroughly. Blacking paste from a tin was applied with a small brush in thin, even layers, first one side, then the other, covering seams, toes, and heels without missing spots. After a short wait for the paste to dull, she buffed vigorously with a soft cloth, holding the boot at different angles to the lamplight until the shine appeared uniform and deep. Edges around soles and heels received extra buffing, so no dull rings remained. Once gleaming, the pair was set on a rack or wrapped in cloth to carry upstairs, placed neatly outside the appropriate door. This methodical scraping, wiping, drying, applying, waiting, buffing, turning, checking, and placing, repeated pair after pair, the faint vinegar scent of blacking and soft rasp of cloth on leather filling these quiet moments of preparation for the household's daily walking.
Fact 70. In larger Victorian homes, the butler or footman performed the regular task of checking and refilling decanters in the dining room or sideboard. He carried a small tray with a funnel, clean cloth, and spare decanters to the room in the late afternoon. Each crystal decanter, port, sherry, claret, was lifted carefully from its position on the sideboard or tray. The stopper was removed slowly, set aside on its glass disc. Contents were inspected by tilting gently to the light. If cloudy or low, he poured the remainder into a spare vessel, rinsed the decanter with a splash of clean water, swirled, and emptied into a basin so no residue clung inside. Fresh wine or spirit was poured slowly through the funnel in a thin stream until the level reached the shoulder of the decanter, avoiding bubbles or splashing against the neck. The stopper was wiped with the cloth and replaced firmly but not tightly. Labels were checked for legibility, any loose edges pressed back. Decanters were returned to their exact places, aligned with faint marks on the polished wood so the arrangement stayed symmetrical. This careful lifting, removing, inspecting, rinsing, pouring, wiping, replacing, aligning, and checking moved decanter by decanter in the quiet dining room, the soft glug of liquid and faint clink of crystal preserving readiness for evening use without disturbance. Fact 71. In Victorian homes, the parlor maid often spent quiet late mornings tending to the brass bell pulls and speaking tubes scattered through hallways and rooms. She carried a small polishing kit, brass paste, soft rags, a narrow brush, and chamois leather along the corridors. At each bell pull, she applied a thin layer of paste to the brass knob or handle with a cloth, rubbing gently in small circles to lift any tarnish or faint finger marks left from daily use. The chain or cord itself was wiped lightly to remove dust without fraying the silk or cotton covering. After a short wait, she buffed the brass firmly with the chamois, turning the knob slowly to reach every side until it shone with a warm, subdued glow. Speaking tube mouthpieces received similar care, the brass rim polished in the same way, the interior wiped with a cloth wrapped around a thin stick to clear any accumulated dust or lint. She checked each mechanism by giving a gentle tug on the pull or a soft blow into the tube, listening for the faint distant ring or whistle to confirm it still functioned smoothly without sticking. Any loose screws were tightened carefully with a small screwdriver kept in her apron pocket. Once finished, she replaced everything exactly as before, ensuring cords hung straight and knobs aligned neatly against the wall plate. This patient applying, rubbing, waiting, buffing, turning, wiping, checking, tugging, tightening, and replacing moved slowly from floor to floor, the soft metallic scent of polish and occasional faint chime preserving the house's quiet system of summoning servants without effort.
Fact 72. The daily routine of filling and trimming candle wicks and holders throughout the house took place in the late afternoon as natural light began to fade. The housemaid prepared a tray with spare candles, small scissors, matches, a damp cloth, and a small dish for trimmings. She moved room by room to each candlestick or candelabrum on mantelpieces, tables, or wall sconces. First, she removed any stubs of old candles by gently twisting or tapping them out, placing remnants in the dish for later melting down into new ones if the household practiced thrift. Fresh candles were inserted slowly, pushed down until secure but not forced so the wax did not crack. Wicks were trimmed to about 1/4 inch with the scissors, snipped straight across so the flame would burn evenly without smoking or guttering later. Any hardened wax strips around the holder were scraped away carefully with a blunt knife edge, then the brass or silver base wiped with the damp cloth to remove residue, followed by a dry buff to restore shine. She checked that each candle stood upright and level, adjusting if necessary by pressing the base gently. After preparing all holders, she lit 1 or 2 test candles in dim rooms to ensure wicks caught cleanly, then extinguished them until evening. This calm removing, inserting, trimming, snipping, scraping, wiping, buffing, checking, lighting, and extinguishing repeated through parlors, dining rooms, and hallways, the faint wax scent and soft snip of scissors part of the house settling into the softer light of dusk.
Fact 73. In many Victorian kitchens, the cook or maid carried out the patient weekly task of cleaning the insides of the large copper preserving pans used for jams and pickles. She waited until the pan had cooled completely after its last use, then carried it to the scullery sink. Hot water from the boiler was poured in slowly to cover the bottom. A handful of salt and vinegar added to loosen any stuck sugar or fruit residue. She let it soak for half an hour or longer, occasionally stirring with a long wooden spoon so the solution reached all corners. After soaking, she scrubbed the interior with a soft chain scourer or coarse cloth, working in steady circles along the curved sides and base to lift any darkened patches without scratching the tin lining. The copper exterior was polished lightly with a paste of lemon juice and salt applied with a rag, rubbed gently until the red metal gleamed again.
Rinsing followed in several changes of clean water, each poured slowly and swirled to ensure no salt or vinegar remained to taint future batches. The pan was dried immediately inside and out with a thick towel, then set upside down on the draining rack to air fully. She checked the tin lining for any worn spots that might need retinning later, noting them quietly. Once dry, the pan returned to its hook above the range, ready for the next batch. This slow pouring, soaking, stirring, scrubbing, rubbing, rinsing, drying, checking, and hanging, repeated every week or after heavy preserving seasons, the faint citrus tang and soft clink of copper settling the kitchen back into order.
Fact 74. The quiet daily airing of feather beds in guest or spare bedrooms helped maintain their loft and freshness over time. The housemaid stripped the bed linens completely, folding them neatly on a nearby chair. She lifted the heavy feather bed with both arms, carried it to an open window or balcony, if the house had one, or propped it upright against a wall near an open sash in cooler weather. The bed rested there for several hours, one side facing the air first, then turned carefully midway so both sides received equal exposure to the gentle draft. She patted the surface slowly with open palms, working from the center outward in overlapping circles to redistribute feathers evenly and break up any slight matting from use. Any faint musty odor was allowed to escape on the moving air. If small stains appeared, she dabbed them lightly with a cloth moistened only in plain water, blotting gently and leaving the area to dry naturally without rubbing. After airing, she smoothed the ticking flat with her hands, checked seams for any tiny openings that might let feathers escape, and stitched minor repairs if needed with fine needle and thread. The bed was carried back, positioned squarely on the mattress base, and remade with fresh sheets tucked tightly. This calm stripping, lifting, carrying, propping, patting, turning, dabbing, smoothing, checking, stitching, replacing, and remaking, repeated for guest beds on dry mornings, the soft thud of patting hands and gentle movement of air through the room, keeping the bedding comfortable and ready for occasional visitors. Fact 75. In Victorian households, the butler or senior footman performed the regular weekly inspection of the wine cellar or cool cupboard where bottles were stored. He carried a small lantern or candle, shielded to avoid open flame near the bottles, along with a soft cloth and notebook. Descending the stone steps slowly, he opened the door carefully to let the cool, steady air settle. Each bottle was lifted gently from its bin or rack, one at a time. Port, sherry, claret, Madeira. Turned slowly in his hands to check the cork for any signs of leakage or mold on the outside. Labels were wiped lightly with the dry cloth to remove dust, ensuring dates and names remained legible without tearing fragile paper. Bottles showing low levels or slight seepage were set aside for immediate use or decanting. Horizontal storage was checked so corks stayed moist and swollen against the neck, preventing air entry. Bins were dusted lightly, any loose straw or packing material straightened. He noted any bottles nearing their best drinking window in the small notebook for the household's records. After finishing, he closed the door firmly to maintain the even temperature and darkness, carried the lantern back upstairs, and placed any selected bottles on a tray for the dining room later. This patient descending, opening, lifting, turning, wiping, checking, noting, straightening, closing, and carrying repeated shelf by shelf in the dim, quiet cellar, the faint musty scent of old wood and wine preserving the household's modest collection through seasons. Fact 76. In Victorian households, the housemaid often performed the quiet daily task of sweeping and tidying the coal scuttles and fire irons in every room with a hearth. She carried a small brush, dustpan, soft rag, and a tin of blacklead polish from the scullery to each parlor, drawing room, or bedroom fireplace. First, she removed the fire irons, poker, tongs, shovel, and sometimes a brush from their stand, laying them on an old cloth spread on the hearthrug. Each iron was wiped with the dry rag to remove loose ash or soot, then polished lightly with a cloth dipped in blacklead paste, rubbed in small, even circles along the shaft and handle until the metal regained its dull shine. The shovel blade received extra attention on both sides, so no streaks showed when held to the light. After polishing, she buffed them firmly with a separate dry cloth, turning each piece slowly to catch any remaining dull spots. The stand itself was swept free of fallen ash with a small brush, wiped down, and checked for stability so it stood firm without wobbling. The coal scuttle nearby was emptied of any remaining small lumps into the grate if a fire was due, then wiped inside and out with a damp rag to remove coal dust, dried thoroughly to prevent rust. Once everything gleamed softly, she replaced the irons in their usual order, poker on the left, tongs on the right, and positioned the scuttle exactly as before, handle turned outward for easy reach. This methodical wiping, applying, rubbing, buffing, turning, sweeping, checking, drying, and replacing, repeated hearth by hearth through the house, the faint metallic scent of blacklead and soft clink of irons settling back into their places as each fireplace waited calmly for the next lighting.
Fact 77. The weekly routine of checking and refolding table napkins in the dining room sideboard kept them crisp and ready without unnecessary ironing. The parlor maid or housekeeper carried a shallow basket to the sideboard drawer. She removed the stack of linen napkins one by one, unfolding each slowly on a clean table surface. Any faint creases from previous folding were smoothed flat with her palms, working from center to edges so the fabric relaxed evenly. She inspected each napkin for small stains, perhaps a drop of gravy or wine, dabbing any marks lightly with a cloth, moistened only in cold water, never hot, to avoid setting the spot permanently. If the stain persisted, it was set aside for the laundry basket later. Edges were checked for fraying threads, which were snipped close with fine scissors rather than pulled. Once clean and smooth, she refolded each napkin in the household's usual style, often thirds lengthwise, then thirds crosswise into a neat square, or sometimes a simple rectangle with the monogrammed corner visible on top. Folds were pressed flat by hand, no iron used at this stage, so the linen stayed soft. Napkins were returned to the drawer in even stacks, alternating direction every few pieces so the pile remained level and did not lean. The drawer lighter was shaken gently to remove any lint, then replaced. This patient unfolding, smoothing, dabbing, snipping, refolding, pressing, stacking, alternating, shaking, and closing continued through the full supply. The soft rustle of linen and gentle press of hands keeping the table settings quietly prepared for every meal.
Fact 78. In many Victorian kitchens, the daily task of wiping and organizing the spice drawer required steady hands and patience to prevent spills and keep flavors distinct. The cook opened the shallow drawer beneath the dresser, removed small jars or tins one at a time, mace, allspice, cloves, nutmeg, cayenne, setting them on the table in rows. Each lid was unscrewed slowly, the contents sniffed gently to judge freshness. If aroma had dulled noticeably, the jar was marked for replenishment from the pantry stock. Interiors were wiped with a dry cloth to remove any clinging powder or moisture rings that might cause clumping over time. Labels, often handwritten in neat ink, were checked for clarity. If faded, she traced over them lightly with a fine pen dipped in black ink, letting the writing dry before replacing the lid. Jars were arranged back in the drawer by frequency of use, most common spices toward the front, rarer ones deeper in, so reaching for them remained effortless during cooking. Tins of ground ginger or cinnamon were tapped lightly on the table to settle contents before closing. The drawer itself received a quick wipe with a barely damp cloth, then thorough drying to discourage any dampness in the wood. Once everything sat neatly, she closed the drawer softly, the faint spicy scent lingering briefly in the kitchen air. This calm removing, unscrewing, sniffing, wiping, tracing, arranging, tapping, wiping, drying, and closing, repeated every few days, the gentle clink of glass or tin and soft scratch of pen preserving the quiet order of the household seasonings.
Fact 79. The careful daily tending of oilcloth floor coverings in hallways and kitchens helped maintain their pattern and prevent cracking in the dry heat from ranges. The housemaid carried a soft mop, bucket of lukewarm water with a drop of mild soap, and dry cloths to the area. She swept the oilcloth first with a soft broom to lift loose dust or small grit carried in from boots, pushing debris into a small pile before scooping it into a dustpan. The mop was wrung almost dry in the bucket, so only a thin film of moisture touched the surface. Too much water could seep under edges and lift the glue over time. She mopped in long, even strokes following the direction of the pattern, working from the far corner toward the exit so she never stepped on wet areas. Any stubborn marks from shoes or spills were dabbed gently with the mop head, never scrubbed hard enough to wear the printed surface. After mopping, she went over the floor again with a clean, dry cloth or soft rag, wiping in the same direction to remove any remaining dampness and bring up a subtle sheen. Edges near walls or under furniture were checked for lifting corners. If any curled, she pressed them flat with her hand and weighted them briefly with a heavy book until they settled. This patient sweeping, mopping, dabbing, wiping, checking, pressing, and weighting repeated section by section in high-traffic areas. The soft swish of the mop and gentle pat of the dry cloth, keeping the floor coverings clean and flexible through seasons of heavy use.
Fact 80. In Victorian homes, the butler or footman often carried out the quiet evening task of laying the dining table in precise, unchanging order for the next day's breakfast or dinner. He carried a tray of silver cutlery, china plates, glassware, and linen from the pantry to the dining room. The tablecloth was spread first, white damask or plain linen, smoothed flat from center to edges so no wrinkles formed under plates. Each place setting began with a charger or dinner plate positioned exactly opposite its neighbor across the table, measured by eye or with a gentle tap of the finger to ensure even spacing. Side plates were placed to the left, butter knives laid across them with blades inward. Forks went left of the plate, dinner fork outermost, salad or fish fork inside if required, while knives rested right, blades facing inward. Soup spoons or dessert spoons aligned parallel above the plate or to the right, depending on the menu. Glasses were arranged above the knives in a neat row, water goblet first, then wine glasses in order of service, each one polished beforehand so no fingerprints showed. Napkins were folded simply or in a triangle, placed on the side plate or in the center of the charger. Salt cellars and pepper pots were set midway between places, cruet stands centered if used. After setting, he walked around the table once, viewing from each side to confirm symmetry, adjusting any piece even slightly out of line with a careful nudge. Candelabra or flowers were positioned last, centered perfectly. This methodical spreading, positioning, laying, aligning, polishing, folding, centering, walking, viewing, nudging, and placing, repeated place by place, the soft clink of silver and faint rustle of linen leaving the dining room calmly prepared for the household's next meal.
Fact 81. In Victorian homes, the scullery maid carried out the slow, careful weekly task of scrubbing the large wooden chopping blocks used for meat and vegetables. She waited until the block had rested overnight after its last heavy use, then carried a bucket of hot water mixed with coarse salt and a stiff scrubbing brush to the scullery table. The block was turned on its side if possible, so both top and bottom received attention. She sprinkled a handful of coarse salt over the surface, then poured a little hot water to dissolve it into a gritty paste. With the brush, she worked in small, firm circles across the entire top, pressing steadily to lift any embedded food particles, bloodstains, or grease that had soaked into the grain over days of chopping. Edges and corners around the raised rim were scrubbed extra carefully with the brush tip, so no residue collected there to harbor bacteria. After scrubbing, she poured clean hot water over the whole block in a slow stream, rinsing away the salty paste completely, then repeated with several changes of water until the runoff ran clear. The surface was wiped dry immediately with a coarse cloth, then left standing upright to air fully in a drafty spot away from direct heat. Any deep knife grooves were noted quietly. If too deep, they might need planing later, but for now, the block was simply smoothed by light sanding with fine sandpaper wrapped around a block of wood, rubbed gently along the grain. Once dry, it was carried back to its place beside the range, positioned level so it stood firm for the next day's preparations. This patient sprinkling, scrubbing, pouring, rinsing, wiping, sanding, airing, carrying, and positioning repeated every week or after particularly messy butchering days. The faint salty scent and soft scrape of brush on wood keeping the chopping surface clean and serviceable through years of steady kitchen work.
Fact 82. The daily quiet tending of the household's collection of small glass vases and flower holders took place in the morning after breakfast in homes that kept fresh flowers or dried arrangements. The parlor maid carried a tray with a small watering can, soft cloth, vinegar water in a bowl, and fine scissors to the drawing room or hallway shelves. Each vase was lifted carefully one at a time: porcelain posy holders, cut glass bud vases, simple china jugs used for blooms, and set on the tray. She poured out any stale water slowly into a basin, tilting the vase gently so sediment did not cling to the sides. The interior was rinsed first with plain water, then with a little vinegar water swirled around to remove any cloudy film or green algae traces from stems left too long. A narrow brush or soft cloth wrapped around a stick reached into narrow necks to wipe the bottom without scratching delicate glass. Exteriors were wiped with a damp cloth, then dried and polished with a dry chamois so no water spots remained when viewed against the light. If dried flowers or everlasting blooms were in use, she removed any faded petals with tweezers, shook the arrangement lightly to dislodge dust, and rearranged stems so the display looked fresh and balanced. Fresh water was added last, poured slowly to avoid bubbles, and the vase returned to its exact spot, perhaps on a side table or windowsill, aligned with faint marks on the surface. This calm lifting, pouring, rinsing, swirling, brushing, wiping, polishing, removing, shaking, rearranging, filling, and replacing moved vase by vase through the main rooms, the soft trickle of water and faint vinegar scent leaving small touches of green or color quietly renewed for another day. Fact 83. In many Victorian households, the butler or footman devoted calm late evenings to the careful checking and winding of mantel clocks in the principal rooms. He carried a small brass key on a chain, a soft feather duster, and a tiny oil dropper to each clock in turn. At the drawing room mantel, he lifted the glass dome or opened the front door gently, listening first to the steady tick to judge if it ran true or had slowed slightly. The key fitted into the winding hole for the time train and turned clockwise in slow, measured counts, usually 30 to 40 turns, until gentle resistance showed the spring fully tensioned without forcing it further. A separate hole for the strike or chime mechanism was wound next, fewer turns needed, each one deliberate so the mechanism stayed balanced. Pendulums were steadied with a finger if they had swung unevenly during the day, the bob adjusted by tiny movements if the time had drifted even a minute. Dust inside the case was brushed away lightly with the feather, never blown, and any small oil points on pivots received a single careful drop from the dropper to keep movement smooth. The hands were set forward or back by the minute hand only, never touched directly, to correct the time against a reliable watch carried in his pocket. After winding, he closed the door or replaced the dome softly, checked the second hand sweep for evenness, and stepped back to view the clock face from across the room. This patient listening, fitting, turning, counting, steadying, brushing, oiling, setting, closing, and checking, repeated clock by clock through parlor, dining room, and hallway, the soft clicks of winding and steady talks continuing evenly into the night as the house settled.
Fact 84. The routine weekly care of the household stock of cotton and linen towels involved patient folding and stacking to keep them neat and ready in the linen cupboard. The housemaid carried bundles from the airing horse or laundry room to the tall cupboard shelves. Each towel, hand, face, bath was shaken gently to release any remaining stiffness from starch or drying, then laid flat on a table. She smoothed the surface with open palms from center to edges, ensuring no twists remained in the weave. Edges were checked for loose threads or small pulls, which were snipped close with fine scissors rather than tugged. Towels were folded in thirds lengthwise, then in half or thirds crosswise, depending on size. Bath towels larger and folded more loosely to avoid creasing the pile too sharply, hand towels smaller and stacked more compactly. She alternated the direction of folds in each pile so the stack remained level and did not lean over time. A small sachet of dried lavender or plain soap was placed between every few layers to keep moths away and add a faint clean scent without staining. Piles were arranged on shelves by type and size, heavier bath towels at the bottom for stability, lighter hand towels higher up for easy reach. Doors were closed firmly afterward to maintain the cool, dry atmosphere inside. This slow shaking, smoothing, snipping, folding, alternating, tucking, stacking, arranging, and closing continued through the full supply every week or after laundry day. The soft rustle of cotton and gentle press of hands preserving the quiet order of the household's towels for daily washing and bathing. Fact 85. In Victorian kitchens, the cook or maid performed the daily gentle task of skimming cream from shallow pans of milk set to rise overnight. Early each morning, she carried the wide, shallow pans, one for each day's milking if the household kept a cow or delivered from a dairy, to the cool larder or pantry shelf. The pans had rested undisturbed since the previous evening, so cream rose naturally to the top in a thick, even layer. She used a flat perforated skimmer or large spoon held almost horizontal to lift the cream slowly in thin sheets, starting from the edge and working inward so the layer did not break or sink back into the milk below. Each spoonful was transferred carefully to a clean earthenware bowl or jar, the skimmer wiped between passes on a cloth to avoid mixing milk back in. She checked the thickness of the remaining cream. If too thin, she left the pan longer. If rich and yellow, she continued until only a faint film remained on the surface. The skimmed milk went into a separate jug for use in cooking or tea, while the collected cream was covered with muslin and left to thicken further if butter making was planned later in the week. Pans were rinsed with cold water, wiped dry, and returned to their place for the next delivery. This patient lifting, skimming, wiping, checking, transferring, covering, rinsing, and returning repeated every morning. The soft scrape of the skimmer and faint creamy scent, part of the kitchen's steady beginning as fresh supplies were prepared for the day's needs.
Fact 86. In Victorian households, the housemaid often carried out the quiet morning task of dusting and straightening the bedroom washstands after the family had finished their ablutions. She moved from room to room with a small tray holding a feather duster, soft cloth dampened in warm water with a drop of vinegar, a dry polishing cloth, and a tiny brush for crevices. At each marble-topped or wooden washstand, she first removed the porcelain basin and ewer carefully, setting them on the tray so nothing chipped against the marble. The basin was emptied of any remaining soapy water into the slop pail, rinsed with clean water poured slowly from a jug, swirled gently, and wiped inside and out with the damp cloth to remove any faint soap film or stray hairs. The ewer received the same gentle rinse and wipe, its spout checked for drips that might leave watermarks on the stand.
The marble or wood surface was then wiped in slow, overlapping strokes with the vinegar-dampened cloth to lift any light soap scum or water rings, followed immediately by drying with the soft polishing cloth so the surface gleamed softly without streaks. Small soap dishes, toothbrush holders, and sponge bowls were lifted one by one, wiped underneath and around the rims, and replaced exactly in their previous positions, aligned with faint marks on the marble or faint shadows on the wood. The towel rail was wiped dry of damp, and any folded towels straightened so edges hung evenly. After finishing, she carried the tray and slop pail downstairs, the faint clink of porcelain and soft rustle of cloth the only sounds in the now quiet bedrooms, as each washstand waited tidy and fresh for the next morning.
Fact 87. The weekly routine of checking and restacking the household supply of firewood and kindling in the yard or cold shed required steady patience to keep it dry and orderly. The housemaid or outdoor servant carried a small wheelbarrow or large basket to the woodpile or shed. She removed logs and sticks one layer at a time, setting them on a clean tarpaulin or old sack spread on the ground. Each piece was inspected quietly, turned in her hands to check for rot, dampness, or insect holes that might spread if stored too long. Sound, dry wood was brushed lightly with a stiff hand brush to dislodge loose bark, cobwebs, or small splinters, then restacked in neat rows inside the shed, larger logs at the bottom for stability, smaller kindling higher up in bundles tied with twine so they stayed compact and easy to lift. Damp or green pieces were set aside in a separate pile near the shed door to season longer in the air. The shed floor was swept clean of sawdust and fallen twigs, pushed into a corner pile for kindling later. She checked the roof and walls for any leaks that might let rain in, noting any loose slates or gaps quietly for repair. Once restacked, she covered the top layer lightly with an old canvas or sacking to protect from sudden showers, then wheeled or carried the tools back indoors. This calm removing, turning, brushing, restacking, sweeping, checking, covering, and returning, repeated every week or after heavy use of fires, the soft thud of logs settling and faint woody scent, keeping the supply ready and dry for the next cold evening. Fact 88. In many Victorian kitchens, the cook devoted calm afternoons to the gentle task of rolling and cutting pastry for pies or tarts without hurry. She dusted the scrubbed deal table lightly with flour from a small dredger, then placed a large ball of chilled dough in the center. Using a long wooden rolling pin, she began rolling outward from the middle in slow, even strokes, turning the dough a quarter turn after every few passes so it stayed circular and even in thickness. She lifted the dough occasionally with floured hands to ensure it did not stick to the table, dusting more flour underneath if needed, but never too much to make it dry. Once rolled to the desired thinness, she checked the thickness by pressing lightly with a finger. If uniform, she proceeded. If uneven, she rolled the thicker areas a little more. A floured pastry cutter or sharp knife was used to trim the edges into a neat circle or rectangle, scraps gathered and re-rolled gently for smaller lids or decorations. She lifted the pastry sheet slowly onto a rolling pin, then unrolled it carefully over the pie dish or tart tin, easing it down into the corners with her fingertips so no air pockets formed underneath. Excess overhanging dough was trimmed with a knife held flat against the rim, edges crimped or pressed with a fork in small regular patterns. The pastry rested a few minutes in the dish to relax before filling. This patient dusting, rolling, turning, lifting, checking, cutting, easing, trimming, crimping, and resting repeated for each batch of pastry, the soft thump of the rolling pin and faint rustle of dough forming a soothing rhythm in the warm kitchen as pies took shape slowly for the oven.
Fact 89. The daily quiet care of the household's collection of small metal trays and salvers kept them bright for serving tea or carrying items. The parlor maid carried a tray of polish, soft rags, a narrow brush, and chamois leather to the pantry or sideboard. Each tray, silver-plated or Britannia metal, was lifted one at a time and laid flat on baize to avoid scratches. She applied a thin layer of plate powder paste with a cloth, working in small sections over the surface, rubbing gently in circles to lift tarnish or finger marks from daily handling. Handles and raised rims received extra attention, with the brush dipped lightly in paste to reach into any engraved patterns or beaded edges. After a short wait for the paste to dry to a dull haze,
she brushed it away with firm strokes, then buffed vigorously with the chamois, turning the tray slowly under lamplight to ensure every inch gleamed evenly without streaks. Engraved crests or monograms were polished with particular care, so details stayed sharp and clear. Once shining, she wiped the tray with a final dry cloth to remove any remaining powder residue, then returned it to the sideboard or rack, positioned so handles faced outward for easy lifting. This methodical applying, rubbing, weighting, brushing, buffing, turning, wiping, and positioning continued tray by tray, the faint metallic scent of polish and soft gleam of restored surfaces, leaving the serving pieces quietly ready for the next afternoon tea or light refreshment.
Fact 90. In Victorian homes, the housemaid performed the patient weekly task of airing and brushing the heavy woolen carpets in less used rooms, such as the spare bedroom or morning room. She rolled the carpet section by section, starting from one end and working toward the other so it lifted evenly without straining the backing. The rolled carpet was carried carefully to the yard or open area steps, laid flat on clean flags or draped over a low line if dry weather allowed. She shook the carpet gently at first, holding opposite edges and flicking it several times to dislodge loose dust and small particles trapped in the pile. A stiff bass broom followed, sweeping both sides in long, steady strokes from center to edges so embedded grit fell away in small piles, swept into a dustpan. Any faint mothball scent from storage was allowed to fade in the fresh air. If spots appeared, she dabbed them lightly with a cloth moistened in diluted vinegar, blotting rather than rubbing to lift marks without soaking the wool. After airing, she brushed the pile upright with a softer carpet brush to restore the nap, then rolled the carpet back up for carrying indoors. She unrolled it slowly across the floor, smoothing it flat from the center outward with her hands so no wrinkles formed, then tucked edges under brass rods or weights if needed. This calm rolling, carrying, shaking, sweeping, dabbing, brushing, unrolling, smoothing, and tucking repeated room by room, the rhythmic whisk of the broom and soft thud of shaking, keeping the carpets clean and resilient through quieter seasons of the house. Fact 91. In Victorian households, the kitchen maid often spent quiet early evenings tending to the large earthenware crocks and jars used for storing pickled vegetables, chutneys, and preserved fruits. She carried each heavy crock from the cool pantry shelf to the scullery table, placing them one by one on an old towel to cushion the base. Lids were lifted slowly, sometimes sealed with wax or tied muslin, and the contents inspected by tilting the crock gently toward the lamplight to check for any bubbles, cloudiness, or floating mold that might indicate spoilage. If the surface looked clear, she skimmed any thin film of oil or scum with a small spoon, wiping the spoon clean between passes on a cloth kept nearby. The inside rim of the crock was wiped with a damp rag dipped in vinegar water to remove any sticky residue around the edge, then dried thoroughly so no moisture remained to incur mold. Lids were cleaned separately, porcelain or glass wiped with the same vinegar cloth, cork or wooden lids brushed lightly to remove dust. Fresh wax was sometimes melted and poured in a thin layer over the top if the seal needed renewing, allowed to cool and harden slowly. Once satisfied, she replaced the lid firmly, checked that it sat level without rocking, and carried the crock back to its shelf, positioned so labels faced outward for easy identification. This patient carrying, lifting, tilting, skimming, wiping, drying, brushing, sealing, checking, and replacing, repeated crock by crock in the dim pantry light, the faint vinegar tang and soft clink of lids settling the preserved stores back into their quiet, orderly rows for gradual use through the months ahead. Fact 92. The daily gentle task of brushing and smoothing the feather dusters themselves kept them effective without scattering more dust than they collected. The housemaid carried the household's collection of feather dusters, goose or turkey feathers bound to wooden handles, to a small outdoor area or open window. She held each duster by the handle and tapped the feathered end lightly against the edge of a step or railing several times, so loose dust and tiny particles fell away naturally. Then she shook it gently in the air,
turning it slowly so all sides released any clinging fluff or soot that had gathered during morning sweeping. If the feathers looked matted, she brushed them lightly with a soft clothes brush, working from the quill end outward in long strokes to restore the natural fluff without breaking any barbs. Any broken or bent feathers were plucked out carefully with fingers so the duster remained neat and even. Handles were wiped with a dry cloth to remove any greasy finger marks from repeated use. After cleaning, she hung each duster upside down on a hook or rack in the servants' passage to air and let the feathers settle back into shape naturally. This calm tapping, shaking, turning, brushing, plucking, wiping, hanging, and letting rest, repeated for every duster in the house, the soft swish of feathers and faint pat of brushing keeping the tools themselves clean and ready for the next round of quiet dusting through the rooms.
Fact 93. In many Victorian homes, the parlor maid performed the patient weekly task of checking and rehanging the small framed pictures and prints in hallways and lesser rooms. She carried a soft cloth, feather duster, small step stool, and a tiny hammer or pliers to the corridor or landing. Each frame, simple wooden or gilt, was lifted gently from its hook or nail, laid flat on a nearby table covered with baize. The glass front was wiped first with a barely damp cloth, wrung almost dry, then polished in slow circular motions with a dry chamois so no streaks remained when viewed from an angle. Dust along the frame edges was brushed away lightly with the feather duster, corners receiving extra care so no cobwebs lingered in the joins. Backing paper or cardboard was inspected for tears. If loose, it was pressed flat or re-glued with a tiny dab of starch paste, allowed to dry under gentle pressure from a book. The picture wire or cord on the back was checked for fraying. If worn, it was replaced with fresh twine threaded through the eyelets and knotted securely. Nails or hooks in the wall were wiped, any loose ones tapped back gently or replaced. The frame was rehanged slowly, adjusted by tiny nudges so it hung perfectly level, checked by eye or with a small spirit level if available, and aligned with its neighbors for even spacing along the wall. This careful lifting, wiping, polishing, brushing, inspecting, pressing, threading, knotting, tapping, rehanging, nudging, and aligning moved picture by picture along the passage, the soft tap of hammer and faint rustle of cloth, leaving the small collection of landscapes, engravings, or family silhouettes quietly straight and dust-free once more.
Fact 94. The routine daily tending of the kitchen's wooden spoon collection kept them smooth and free from cracks over years of stirring. The cook, or scullery maid, gathered all spoons, long-handled for stock pots, smaller ones for sauces, from their jar or hook beside the range after evening clearing. She carried them to the scullery sink in a small basin. Each spoon was rinsed first under cold water from the pump to remove any clinging food particles, then soaked briefly in warm soapy water to soften any dried-on residue. Using a soft cloth or fine sandpaper wrapped around a finger, she rubbed gently along the bowl and handle in the direction of the grain, smoothing any rough spots or small splinters that had formed from repeated use in hot liquids. Cracks were examined. If shallow, they were rubbed lightly to prevent deepening. Deeper ones set aside for oiling or eventual replacement. After cleaning, she rinsed each spoon thoroughly in several changes of clean water, held it up to drain, then wiped dry immediately with a thick towel so no moisture remained to encourage splitting. A thin coat of food-grade oil, linseed or vegetable, was applied sparingly with a cloth, rubbed in until absorbed, leaving the wood with a soft, protective sheen. Spoons were stood upright in their jar to air fully before returning to their place near the stove, arranged by size so longer ones stayed at the back. This patient rinsing, soaking, rubbing, examining, rinsing, drying, oiling, and arranging, repeated for the full set every evening, the soft scrape of sandpaper and faint oily scent preserving the simple wooden tools for countless more stirs in the warm kitchen.
Fact 95. In Victorian households, the housemaid carried out the calm, weekly task of checking and refilling the small glass ink bottles on writing desks and in studies. She prepared a tray with a fresh ink bottle, small funnel,
clean cloth, blotting paper, and pen wipers. Moving room by room, she lifted each inkstand, often silver or cut glass with 1 or 2 wells, from its place on the desk. The old bottle or well was unscrewed or lifted out carefully, contents inspected by tilting to the light. If thick, separated, or low, she poured the remainder into a spare container for disposal or reuse in less important writing. The well was rinsed with a splash of clean water, swirled gently, and wiped inside with a cloth wrapped around a thin stick to remove any dried crust around the rim or bottom. Fresh ink was poured slowly through the funnel in a thin stream until the level sat just below the neck, avoiding bubbles or overflow that might stain the stand. The stopper or cap was wiped dry and replaced firmly. Any spilled drops on the outside were dabbed away at once. Pens resting nearby were wiped clean, nibs checked for rust or bends and replaced if needed from a small stock kept in a drawer. Blotting paper was turned or replaced if heavily stained, and pen wipers shaken out. The inkstand was returned to its exact position on the desk, aligned with faint marks on the leather surface so it looked undisturbed. This gentle lifting, unscrewing, inspecting, rinsing, swirling, wiping, pouring, dabbing, replacing, checking, and aligning, repeated desk by desk in the quiet study or morning room, the faint metallic scent of ink and soft glug of liquid, leaving writing tools quietly replenished for letters, accounts, or notes yet to come.
Fact 96. In Victorian homes, the housemaid carried out the quiet weekly task of checking and relining the drawers of bedroom chests and dressing tables with fresh paper. She opened each drawer slowly, one at a time, lifting out folded undergarments, stockings, handkerchiefs, or small accessories, and placing them temporarily on the bed, covered with a clean sheet. The old lining paper, often plain brown or newspaper, was lifted carefully at the corners, folded inward to contain any dust or lint that had collected underneath, and carried to the waste bin. The empty drawer bottom was wiped with a soft, dry cloth to remove any remaining particles, then inspected for small splinters or rough spots along the edges that might snag delicate fabrics. If found, she smoothed them lightly with fine sandpaper wrapped around her finger. Fresh lining paper, cut to fit exactly from a roll kept in the linen cupboard, was laid flat inside the drawer, pressed down gently with her palms so it sat smooth without bubbles or creases. Corners were tucked neatly under the sides. Contents were returned in the same order. Stockings rolled in pairs at the back, handkerchiefs stacked in front, undergarments folded precisely so edges aligned, each layer smoothed flat before the next went in. Drawers were closed softly, handles wiped if finger marks showed, and the process repeated for every drawer in the chest or dressing table. This patient opening, lifting, folding, wiping, inspecting, smoothing, cutting, laying, pressing, tucking, returning, aligning, closing, and wiping continued chest by chest in the bedrooms, the soft rustle of paper and gentle press of hands leaving the storage spaces clean, orderly, and gentle on fabrics for another week.
Fact 97. The daily gentle tending of the household's collection of small china ornaments in the drawing room took place in the late morning when the room was unoccupied. The parlor maid carried a small felt-lined tray, feather duster, soft cloth dampened in warm water, and dry chamois to the mantel and side tables. Each figurine, shepherdess, shepherd boy, small vase, or animal model was lifted one by one with both hands and placed carefully on the tray so nothing touched another. The base was wiped first with the damp cloth to remove any fine soot or dust that had settled overnight, then dried immediately with the chamois so no watermarks formed on the glazed surface. Delicate painted details, faces, flowers, gilt trim, were brushed lightly with the feather duster, never touched directly with fingers to avoid oils dulling the colors over time. She held each piece to the window light to check for hairline cracks or faint crazing in the glaze, noting any quietly for later repair or replacement if severe. Once clean, she returned the ornament to its exact spot on the mantel or shelf, turning it slowly until it faced the same direction as before, often aligned with faint marks left by years in the same place or with its pair opposite.
The shelf or mantel beneath was wiped quickly after removal, then polished dry so the whole display gleamed softly. This calm lifting, wiping, drying, brushing, holding, checking, turning, aligning, and polishing repeated ornament by ornament in the quiet drawing room, the faint clink of china on felt and soft whisper of feathers, leaving the small treasures dust-free and perfectly arranged for another peaceful afternoon.
Fact 98. In many Victorian kitchens, the cook performed the patient daily task of checking and stirring the sourdough starter or yeast culture kept in a stone jar on the warmest shelf near the range. Early each morning, she carried the heavy jar to the table, unscrewed or lifted the lid slowly, and peered inside to observe the surface. Small bubbles rising steadily meant it was active and healthy. She stirred the thick mixture gently with a long wooden spoon in slow circles, scraping down the sides so all portions received fresh air and warmth. A small portion was scooped out into a bowl for the day's bread making, the rest topped up with equal parts fresh flour and water measured from the pantry bin and jug. The new additions were mixed in thoroughly, but without vigorous beating, slow folding motions until no dry pockets remained. The surface was smoothed flat with the back of the spoon, then the jar covered loosely with muslin or a plate to allow gases to escape while keeping dust out. She checked the consistency by feel. If too thick, she added a splash more water. If too thin, a little extra flour, adjusting gradually until it felt right for the next feeding. The jar returned to its warm spot, positioned so sunlight did not strike it directly, but gentle heat from the range reached it steadily. This calm carrying, unscrewing, observing, stirring, scraping, scooping, measuring, folding, smoothing, covering, checking, adjusting, and replacing repeated every single day. The soft bubble of fermentation and gentle scrape of wood against stone, maintaining the living culture for consistent loaves week after week.
Fact 99. The weekly quiet care of the household's leather-bound ledgers and account books in the study or morning room helped preserve their pages and bindings for accurate record-keeping. The butler or housekeeper carried the heavy volumes to a large table covered with baize. Each ledger was opened slowly to its last used page, then closed again to check the spine for cracking or loosening stitches. The exterior leather was wiped lightly with a cloth dampened in a mixture of vinegar and water, rubbed gently along the grain to lift any faint dust or finger marks without soaking the material. Edges of the pages were fanned carefully with a gloved finger to release trapped dust, never bent backward sharply. If ink blots appeared on outer pages, they were dabbed lightly with blotting paper pressed flat, never rubbed. The brass clasps or corners, if present, were polished with a tiny amount of metal paste applied with a narrow brush, buffed to a soft shine so no tarnish dulled the detail. Inside, ruled columns were checked for fading ink. Any loose pages were noted for restitching later with fine thread. After care, the ledgers were closed firmly, placed back on the shelf in chronological order, oldest at the left, newest at the right, so they leaned slightly against a bookend for support without slumping. This patient carrying, opening, wiping, rubbing, fanning, dabbing, brushing, buffing, checking, noting, closing, aligning, and placing continued ledger by ledger in the quiet study, the faint vinegar scent and soft creak of leather leaving the household accounts neatly preserved and ready for the next entry.
Fact 100. In Victorian homes, the final quiet task of the day for many servants was the careful snuffing and cleaning of candles or lamps after the household had retired. The housemaid or parlor-maid carried a small brass snuffer, wick trimmer, cloth, and tray from room to room in the darkened house. At each lamp or candlestick, she lowered the wick slowly until the flame shrank to a tiny blue point, then extinguished it completely with the snuffer, cupping it gently over the wick so no smoke drifted upward. Charred wick ends were trimmed to a neat 1/4 inch with the small scissors so the next lighting would be clean and even. Any hardened wax strips around the holder were scraped away carefully with a blunt knife held flat, collected on the tray for later melting. Glass chimneys or shades were wiped inside and out with a dry cloth to remove soot, checked for warmth before touching, and replaced securely. Candle stubs were removed by gentle twisting, placed in a tin on the tray for remaking into new tapers if the household saved wax. Bases were polished lightly of silver or brass, wiped dry so no residue remained. After finishing each light, she stepped back to ensure no faint glow lingered, then moved to the next room with soft footsteps. This patient lowering, snuffing, trimming, scraping, wiping, checking, removing, polishing, and stepping continued through parlors, hallways, and bedrooms until the house fell completely dark and still, the faint scent of extinguished wick and soft clink of the snuffer marking the peaceful close of another ordinary day in the Victorian home.